A sleepy southern town becomes a place of unimaginable horror as young girls begin disappearing. A cunning serial killer is on the loose, tormenting a family while evading capture. Until investigators could find a way to stop him, he would continue his hunt for more victims.
He was a predator, abducting girls and young women from their own front yards in broad daylight. He was a sadist, phoning one victim's family, taunting them, boosting, then dashing their hope. And he wouldn't stop until we stopped him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. This serial killer, whoever he was, could pass unnoticed in society. Yet he craved the attention his crimes provided. Somewhere in this contradiction lay the key to his exposure.
May 31st, 1985. The afternoon sun over South Carolina roasted the town of Lexington to a blistering 100 degrees. Sherry Faye Smith had found relief from the heat at a pool party with her boyfriend and fellow high school seniors. She was looking forward to the carefree days between her final exams and graduation. All of summer and the rest of her life awaited the ambitious 17-year-old. She lived with her family in a quiet, rural community, a safe place tucked away on the edge of town. The Smiths' home sat on a generous lot of dense woods. The house was about 200 yards from the road. Sherry's dad, Robert Smith, served as a local pastor. This Friday afternoon, he worked at home in his second-floor office. He looked up from his studies to see his daughter pulling into the driveway and stopping to get the mail. In the next few moments, life in Lexington, South Carolina, changed forever. Expecting Sherry to walk in the house, Mr. Smith looked out the window again. He noticed her car remained near the mailbox, but she was nowhere in sight. Immediately, he felt something was odd. He decided to take a look. Sherry suffered from diabetes. With her blood sugar out of balance, she might become disoriented or incapacitated. When he arrived at the bottom of the driveway, Mr. Smith found Sherry's car still running, and the door swung open.
Sherry?
But his daughter was gone. There was no response to his call.
Sherry!
His mind began to race as he imagined the possibilities. Could she be lying in the woods somewhere, unconscious or in shock?
Sherry!
He yelled louder as he grew more frantic with worry.
Sherry!
There was no sign of her anywhere. Sherry was gone. Mr. Smith immediately called for help. The assistant sheriff of Lexington County responded to the call. The distraught father explained that Sherry was not the type to just run off.
I'm not sure what happened, but how much time it had.
She was responsible, warm, and well-adjusted. Not the sort of teenager to run away. But the sheriff took nothing for granted. He questioned Smith about his relationship with his daughter. Today, more than a decade later, Assistant Sheriff Louis McCarty vividly recalls his impressions of the Smith family during his first conversation with Sherry's father.
We discussed his daughter's grades, what kind of child she was. It was determined that there was no animosity between mother and father and daughter. The Smith family was a very, very close-knit family, a very religious family. You just had the sixth sense that they were extremely close, that this child would not have run away on her own.
The investigator couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened to Sherry Smith. And the same intuition told him it had nothing to do with her medical condition. Every minute that passed increased the likelihood that Sherry might never be found. Knowing this, the sheriff called for assistance, bypassing the 24-hour waiting period required before officially classifying an individual as a missing person. While waiting for the other officers to arrive, the sheriff and Robert Smith retraced Sherry's steps, careful not to destroy any possible evidence. But the naked eye search yielded nothing. They had to wait for more equipment and expertise. Within minutes, officers from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, arrived at the Smith home. Investigators combed the scene, looking for tire tracks, foot impressions, or fingerprints. They found nothing. Knowing the next few hours were critical, the authorities assembled a task force and organized a massive ground search. The possibility of an abduction prompted a swift response. Crimes like this simply did not happen. Surrounding counties sent every available officer to help. Word of Sherry's disappearance spread quickly through the close-knit community of Lexington. Hundreds of local residents offered to participate in the search. Still, they found no trace of the young woman. Though there was no direct evidence that a federal crime had been committed, state investigators called on the expertise of the FBI. They wanted the Bureau to unofficially advise in the search and to assist in the investigation. Special Agent John Vollmer from the FBI's Columbia office was dispatched to the Smiths' house the next morning. The disappearance had even baffled the experts.
She was nowhere to be found. And she was not from a type of family background where that would readily indicate she'd run off with somebody. She was from a very stable, good family background, and they immediately thought obviously something had happened to her. But we had no idea at that point what.
The search urgently continued, with hundreds of volunteers and officers working around the clock. It was a daunting task. The heat and terrain hindered the hunt.
When you're talking about looking in a county of 500 square miles, it's almost like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's extremely difficult because you don't know where to begin and where to go.
2 long, hot days of searching passed, and still there was no sign of Sherry. It grew more and more likely that this was an abduction. Horrified that a crime like this could happen in their town, the residents of Lexington were gripped by fear. Children were not seen without their parents. No one went anywhere alone. With every hour that passed, investigators hoped there was still enough time to find Sherry unharmed. On June 3rd, 3 days after Sherry Faye's disappearance, at about 2:30 in the morning, a call disturbed the Smiths' restless sleep. Robert answered the phone. A voice he did not recognize asked for his wife, Hilda.
Hello?
The caller claimed to be Sherry's abductor.
Yes.
The captor apologized for taking Sherry and insisted that she would eventually be returned. He made clear this was not a ransom call. He told Hilda that she would receive a letter in the mail later that day.
Just tell us what you want.
He promised he'd call back and hung up.
He hung up.
Though a phone tap had been set up earlier, the call was too short to get a trace. SLED officers who were at the Smith home called Agent Vollmer immediately.
It really was unclear whether she was alive or dead. The caller was indicating that she was alive, that he would see that she was returned safely. And I think at that point everyone was hopeful that he was truthful and that in fact she was not dead and would be returned to her home and family.
A letter, hopefully containing clues to Sherry's whereabouts, would be a welcome break. But first they had to find out if the letter, promised by the caller, really did exist. Not wasting any time, they woke the town's postmaster and ordered him to open the post office before daybreak. Then they went to work, sifting letter by letter through the piles of outgoing mail.
Long envelope, something similar to this.
After a half hour, the postmaster found an envelope addressed to the Smiths. Carefully, they slipped it into an evidence bag and sent it to the SLED forensic labs for analysis. Inside the envelope, examiners found a 2-page letter written on yellow legal paper. Their excitement melted into horror as they began reading the letter. It was entitled, Last Will and Testament. It began, I love you, Mommy, Daddy, Robert, Dawn, and Richard, and everyone else, and all other friends and relatives. My thoughts will always be with and in you. Casket closed. I am sorry if I ever disappointed you in any way. I only wanted to make you proud of me because I have always been proud of my family. The letter ended with, all my love, always, Sharon, Sherry Faye, Smith. With the help of the Smith family, investigators confirmed that the handwriting was Sherry's. Lab examiners began the painstaking task of analyzing the letter. Searching for prints, hairs, fibers, and other clues would take weeks. While investigators hoped the document might provide other valuable leads, they were alarmed by the letter's content.
We were shocked. We were concerned for her well-being. There were several phrases in the letter that she refers to. One would be casket closed. Is, you know, why would a child make a statement, casket closed?
Sherry's fate was unclear. The abductor had all the answers. He had promised to call again. Until he did, the Smith family clung desperately to hope. Just days after Sherry Faye's disappearance, her abductor had called to taunt the family. Since then, agents and detectives set up a voice recorder in addition to the tap already on the Smith phone. Having the abductor's voice on tape would be invaluable. If the suspect called again, they would be ready. The wait was excruciating. At 8 o'clock on the evening of June 3rd, the phone rang.
Go ahead and answer it and try to stay on the phone as long as possible.
Hello?
It was the voice from the night before. He spoke to Hilda.
Did you receive the letter today?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you know now that this is not a hoax call.
Yes, I know that.
Okay, listen real carefully. I got to hurry. I know these calls are being traced.
Is Sherry with you?
Sherry is now part of me. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, our souls are one now.
Your souls are one now with Sherry?
Yes, and we're trying to work this out. So please do what we ask.
The trace had been successful.
Go ahead, US 1.
The suspect had called from a phone booth about 20 miles away from the Smith home. A network of sheriff's deputies staking out the area raced to the scene, hoping to catch the caller still on the phone. But when they arrived, all they found was a phone dangling off the hook.
Area, any cars? Give me plates, any cars leaving the immediate area right now.
He had slipped away, leaving nothing behind, not even fingerprints.
They just missed him.
Sherry's older sister, Dawn, recollects the agonizing uncertainty.
I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. I didn't understand that he was a very sick person. I'd never dealt with anybody like that in my life. But I really believed that he was taking care of her and that there had to be some reason for the madness of Sherry being taken.
On the surface, the abductor's phone conversations revealed nothing about Sherry's whereabouts. However, for the FBI, the phone calls offered the first glimpse inside the mind of this twisted predator. It would be up to FBI profilers in the Investigative Support Unit at Quantico, Virginia, to penetrate this criminal's mind. John Douglas pioneered behavioral profiling for the FBI. He and others developed the investigative tool from over 25 years of interviews with convicted killers, arsonists, rapists, and bombers.
Okay, good. When someone asks for a profile, what they're looking for are characteristics, which includes gender, includes age, race, sometimes body typing, educational level, occupational type.
To determine these characteristics, the profiler attempts to think like the killer. He tries to uncover his motivations. Examining every aspect of a crime reveals patterns of behavior. What emerges is a profile describing the type of person the killer will most likely be. After scrutinizing every detail of Sherry's abduction, Douglas generated a 22-point profile of the suspect. He painted the abductor as a white male, in his late 20s to early 30s, with above-average intelligence. He would most likely work as a blue-collar day laborer. Because it sounded as if the killer had electronically distorted his voice, he probably worked in electrical contracting. He would have a prior criminal record. Douglas also suggested he lived locally. The tone and content of his phone calls indicated he was an asocial obsessive-compulsive. If the stress of everyday life became too great, he would break down. He would then feel compelled to compensate for his own inadequacies through violent actions.
He's the type of guy that feels like one grain of sand on a beach where there are billions and billions of grains of sand. He feels like nothing. He feels like a nobody. And how can this nobody, this personality, this person who's probably overweight, low self-esteem, unattractive, how can he become a somebody? He'll go after victims that there was no chance that he would ever come in contact with someone like a Sherry Faye Smith. And so for the first time in their life, they can be powerful.
On Wednesday, June 5th, the Smiths received another call. This time, he gave the family directions to where they would find Sherry.
Listen carefully. Take Highway 378 west to Traffic Circle. Turn left at white frame building. 6 feet beyond, we're waiting. God chose us.
Investigators raced to the location, hoping they might still find her alive. Six days after her mysterious disappearance, investigators found the body of Sherry Faye Smith.
When the Smith family received the call to the location of the body, we went immediately there, and our worst fears came true.
Sherry's body had been laid in the woods of Saluda County, some 17 miles from the home from which she vanished. Her abductor was now wanted for first-degree murder. A week of 100-degree heat had taken its toll. The body's advanced state of decay worked in the killer's favor. The medical examiner could not determine the exact cause and time of death. To John Douglas, the location and condition of the crime scene provided further insight into the suspect's mind.
He had some criminal sophistication, because I believe what he did is he waited for her to now go into advanced stages of decomposition, which would make it more difficult for law enforcement to determine cause and method of death in this state of decomposition.
The confirmation of Sherry's murder devastated the Lexington community. That Saturday, a crowd of 1,000 mourners attended a funeral service at the town's First Baptist Church. That evening, following Sherry's funeral, the killer could not resist inflicting more torment.
Well, may I speak to Mrs. Smith?
Sherry's Aunt Beverly answered the phone.
I want to speak to Dawn.
I'm sorry, she's not available either.
Beverly stalled him, hoping to gain valuable time for the phone trace.
Yeah, I'll have to go then if I can't talk to her.
But the suspect threatened to hang up if he couldn't immediately speak to Dawn.
Hello?
This thing got out of hand, and all I wanted to do was make love to Dawn. I've been watching her for a couple of weeks.
To who?
To Sherry. Dawn, I hope you and your family forgive me for this.
When you killed Sherry, was she at peace? She wasn't afraid or anything?
She was not. She was at peace. She knew that God was with her, and she was going to become an angel.
Overwhelmed with grief, Sherry's mother insisted on talking to her daughter's murderer.
Did you tell her you were going to kill her?
Yes, I did, and I gave her the choice, and she picked suffocation.
My God, how could you?
It did not escape the attention of the FBI and local investigators that the killer had mistakenly used Dawn's name when he spoke of Sherry. They braced themselves for the possibility that this killer might be turning his murderous obsession towards Dawn. But the suspect would make only one more call before falling ominously silent. Though he wasn't talking, they knew he was still out there, terrifying a community. And the profile predicted that if he killed once, he would kill again. In June 1985, FBI investigators continued to hunt the kidnapper and killer of 17-year-old Sherry Smith. While investigators focused on the Smith murder, the elusive predator pursued other plans. On Friday, June 14th, 2 weeks after Sherry's abduction, a man grabbed Deborah May Helmick from her front yard in Richland County as she played with her brother. She was just 9 years old. The child's screaming alerted a neighbor. But the woman was not fast enough. The abductor managed to slip away in broad daylight. Helmick's neighbor could only provide vague information. However, the general description of the suspect and his method appeared eerily similar to the man the FBI wanted for the murder of Sherry. Richland County sheriffs immediately contacted the task force in nearby Lexington.
Within moments of that abduction, we were aware of it and began to focus on that case also. We were pretty much in our minds, I think that everybody knew these two cases were connected.
For John Douglas, the case took on an even greater sense of urgency. Deborah May Helmick's fate seemed almost certain.
Once they get the urge, they're out looking for the preferential victim, but if they cannot find the victim of choice, they will go after whoever is available. And that was the case here with Deborah May Helmick.
News of the second abduction brought Douglas down from Quantico, Virginia to South Carolina. The FBI hoped they could find 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick before her young life was cut short. In the Smith case, the killer's phone calls had been a critical link for the investigators. It had been nearly a week since Deborah's disappearance, and they hadn't heard from him. To get him to call, Douglas devised a plan. With the help of the local media, he would set a trap.
And the way that
One key element of the plan placed Dawn Smith in jeopardy. Douglas had to ask the Smiths to put their other daughter at risk to catch Sherry's killer and hopefully find young Deborah. Dawn agreed.
A lot of times people thought we were twins. We looked a lot alike, and so they came up with this plan that if I were to answer the phone, maybe he would turn that fascination from Sherry to me. And if I could keep him on the phone talking long enough about Sherry, about himself, about anything to keep him on the phone, then they could trace the call and catch him.
Just allow him to...
Douglas's strategy centered around a memorial service for Sherry. Investigators promoted the service in the local press. The agents hoped the attention to his first victim would rekindle the killer's fascination with Dawn. Douglas needed something else to bait the trap. A personal item from Sherry's room. Based on experience, Douglas knew that sexual predators are often attracted to personal items of their victims.
She likes koalas.
They want mementos that they can keep, even display as trophies. He noticed the koala bear. It was the mascot of the university she planned to attend in the fall. The day of the memorial service, plainclothed agents swarmed the grounds, hoping their suspect would visit the cemetery. As the family's minister delivered a eulogy, Dawn and her parents huddled close. Though Dawn had willingly volunteered to lure the killer to the trap, the danger it presented weighed on everyone's mind. There was no telling what the suspect might do.
The security around Dawn was heightened. We were extremely concerned about Dawn becoming a victim.
Then, as planned, Dawn placed some flowers and the koala bear on her sister's grave. Now all that was left to do was wait. Using Douglas's profile, FBI agents coached Dawn on how to handle the suspect when he called.
I was told to never be threatening, to never be harsh, to be real understanding and sympathetic and compassionate, and I was with him. And I think he liked that because he felt like he was very much in charge, which is something that he thrived on.
Several calls came to the Smith home following the memorial service. Not knowing if it was Sherry's killer, Dawn had to answer every one. Shortly after midnight, the phone at the Smith house rang again.
Hello? I have a call to Dawn Smith from Sherry. Will you back to the call?
Yes.
As Douglas had hoped, the culprit took the bait. And, as anticipated, the killer had turned his focus to Dawn.
You can't be protected all the time.
He made it clear to her that she was going to be his next victim.
You know, God wants you to join Cherry Bay. It's just a matter of time. This month.
Despite the threat, Dawn kept him on the line, enduring abuse from the man who murdered her sister, while officials traced the origin of the call.
Richland County?
Yeah, okay, listen carefully. Go 1 north.
Then, before hanging up, the killer offered directions.
Turn right. Deborah May is waiting. God forgive us all.
Special Agent John Vollmer feared that the killer would not stop there.
Once he called about Deborah Helmick, then you're leading into the possibility that you now are dealing with a possible serial killer who has killed now at least 2, you suspect, maybe others before, and may continue to kill others.
Despite Douglas's success at getting the suspect to call, no one had anticipated just how far away the killer would go to avoid detection. Tracing the call from outside the area took additional time. Again, the suspect left the phone booth moments before the authorities could reach him.
We were very, very close to catching him on a number of occasions, and it's almost as if he sensed this and began to move further in making his phone call.
Other investigators followed the caller's directions. There, they found 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick murdered. The gamble had failed. With every missed opportunity, the probability of more victims increased. And now, Dawn was the most likely target. Investigators feared the killer would make an attempt to abduct her. An elusive serial killer had already killed 2 girls around Lexington, South Carolina. The slim amount of evidence frustrated FBI investigators as well as local law enforcement. But the forensic analysis was about to generate the biggest break in the investigation. The last will and testament of Sherry Smith was examined by Gail Heath, director of the Question Document section of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Labs. Using an ESDA machine, Heath hoped to find hard evidence. The ESDA, an acronym for Electrostatic Detection Apparatus, can pick up images that are invisible to the naked eye. It works on the opposite principle of a printing press. Instead of coating raised letters with ink to create an image, the ESDA fills in the indentations on the document in question with graphite. When an imaging film similar to Saran wrap is pulled tight over the document, a readable image comes through. After hours of examining the document, Heath found indented writing. It appeared to be a phone number and a name.
The particular name and phone number in question, we were able to bring up the entire area code, the first 3 numbers of the prefix, the next 2 numbers, the 3rd number we were unsure of, and then we had the 4th number.
The name on the pad was Joe. From the area code, investigators determined the number was from Alabama. To fill in the missing digit, investigators called every combination of the phone number until they reached a party who had the same name as the one found on the legal pad. They finally made a match. The number belonged to a man named Joe Shepard. Investigators scrutinized his phone records. They found that he had received a call from an address just outside of Lexington in Lake Murray, South Carolina. Either of these addresses could belong to the killer. Armed with the FBI profile, local police visited the Alabama address.
How you doing? You Mr. Shepard?
They met Joe Shepard. He didn't match the killer's profile.
Do you know anybody
Even though he was not a suspect, he could still be an important link to the killer. Police had to find out the connection between him and the Lake Murray, South Carolina phone call. Shepard explained it came from his parents' home. South Carolina officers verified that the address belonged to Joe Shepard's parents, Ellis and Sharon Shepard. Investigators went to the Lake Murray address to question the residents. The house was just 2 miles from where police found the body of 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick.
10-4.
They learned that Ellis worked as an electrician in home construction. It was a profession the FBI profile predicted. As the officers knocked on the door, a car pulled into the driveway. When investigators saw the Shepards, they immediately felt they had hit another dead end. Besides Ellis Shepard's profession, nothing else seemed to fit the profile. They questioned them anyway. The Shepards told them that they had recently returned from a 6-week trip. The officers casually asked if the couple knew about the Smith and Helmick murders. With every question, the police noticed Mrs. Shepard becoming more concerned. The Shepards were beginning to suspect their house sitter, Larry Jean Bell. As they described Bell, elements of the profile fell into place. He was a white male, in his 30s, who lived with his parents. He sometimes assisted Ellis in home construction. Just days earlier, when the Shepards returned from the vacation, Bell had picked them up from the airport. He talked to the Shepards at length about the cases. He was closely following the news of the murders. It was more evidence of a meticulous mind and behavior consistent with the profile.
They said that he had saved the newspaper articles, told them all about the case in great detail from the airport back to their residence. Again, it was uncanny how much this profile was on track.
The detectives asked if they could see the inside of the house. Suspecting the killer had used a weapon to force Sherry Smith into the car, they asked Ellis Shepard if he owned a gun. Shepard led them to a drawer where he kept his revolver.
Last time I used this gun.
To his surprise, the gun was gone.
Got a good idea
The officers asked the couple to accompany them to the precinct. They wanted the Shepards to listen to recordings of the killer's calls to the Smith family. The investigators needed to know if the voice on the recordings belonged to their house sitter.
For a couple of months, and then they'd find out I'm sane, and then I'd get tried and get sent to electric chair, put in prison rest of my life. I'm not going to stay in prison rest of my life.
Though the caller may have electronically altered his voice, to the Shepards, it was clear that the man on the tape was their house sitter, Larry Jean Bell.
I filled in all the holes and everything.
We were all extremely elated. We could not show any emotion, but we knew that we had the case at that point. We had our man.
Or something, but anyway.
The Shepards told the police that they expected Bell to return to their home at 7:30 the next morning for work.
We're going to have a Detective Perry take you outside.
Investigators staked out Bell's residence. This time, there was no way he could elude capture. Larry Jean Bell headed down the highway to the Shepards. He failed to notice the unmarked police car following behind him. The officers radioed to another car waiting to cut him off at the approaching intersection. June 26, 1985, at 7:19 a.m., investigators finally trapped the elusive Larry Gene Bell. This time, it was the investigators who were one step ahead. Bell was arrested without resistance and taken to the precinct for questioning. With Bell now in custody, investigators still needed to build an airtight case to make sure he would never be free to kill again. Combining hard forensic evidence with the FBI profile, South Carolina police arrested Larry Gene Bell on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. But now they had to prove beyond any doubt that he was indeed the killer of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Hellman. It was up to Lexington County Solicitor Donald Myers to make the case. A career prosecutor, Myers was determined to convict the killer who had so horrifically taunted his victim's family.
I did not like Larry Gene Bell even before I knew him. And I knew that this was probably the most publicized case that we would ever had, the most publicized in South Carolina up to that time. And I pretty much committed myself to go after him with everything I had.
Though there was powerful evidence against Bell, it was only circumstantial. Still, in the state of South Carolina, a confession could guarantee the maximum sentence.
God wants you to join.
Myers needed to make sure that Bell would never be able to take another life.
Everything's stacked up against him.
He wanted a confession.
He's facing a mountain of evidence. Find out.
Again, they called on the FBI to help. They recommended setting up an interrogation room that would elicit a self-incriminating statement.
For instance, a map showing where the phone calls were made, some pictures of the victim so that he's aware as he looks about the room to remind him of the victim. You might have fingerprint cards on the table. You might have notebooks or file cabinets that would have his name on them, all to make him think you obviously have narrowed in on him. You've got the goods on him. He might as well go ahead and give it up.
While the officers prepared to question Bell, other detectives secured a search warrant for the Shepherd's house. For the next 12 hours, the forensic team combed every square inch of the home, looking for anything that would firmly connect Bell to the crimes. As the profile predicted, the house was in perfect order. It was meticulously cleaned, vacuumed, and dusted, particularly in the room where Larry Gene Bell had been staying. But beneath the orderly exterior, the team uncovered evidence of his deviance. The bed's pristine sheets concealed a thin, dirty mattress, and beneath that lay a porn magazine and a handgun that matched the description of Mr. Shepherd's missing .38. Despite the freshly vacuumed carpets, an investigator retrieved a blonde hair in the space where a vacuum cleaner wouldn't reach. A lab would match the strand to Sherry Smith.
Mr. Bell, how are you this afternoon? Good to see you here.
While the investigators continued the search for evidence at the Shepherd's home, detectives at the interrogation carried out the FBI's strategy. First, they made sure Bell was comfortable. As advised by Douglas, they spoke to the suspect in a non-threatening way. They pretended to empathize with him, to understand his pain, in order to pry him open. They walked their suspect through the growing mound of evidence condemning him. At every chance, they reminded him of the victims. Bell denied everything. However, he did make a curious request. He wanted to meet Dawn and Hilda Smith. Hoping the mother and sister of his first victim might stir a confession, The Smiths agreed. Hilda and Dawn tried to mentally prepare themselves. Finally, they stepped into the room and came face to face with Sherry's killer.
He began to mumble and he began to speak about how he was sorry that the person sitting in that chair couldn't have been the one that had done this. But another Larry Bell could have been the one. He really didn't make a lot of sense. And so I remember sitting there, I remember looking at him, I remember listening to him, and I really just felt disgust that I knew this was the man. And he wasn't even man enough to say, I did it, I'm sorry, just trying to make excuses. But my mom said the most incredible thing to him. She said, I know you're the man that killed my daughter, and I can honestly say that I don't hate you. And he got teary.
But Bell's emotional break went only to the point of tears. He never made the confession authorities wanted. After weeks of compiling evidence, Myers and the investigators began to piece together the sequence of events of May 31st, 1985. Bell noticed Sherry Smith after dropping his mother off at a doctor's appointment. Something about the young woman triggered his lecherous cravings. As she left the parking lot, Bell followed. His desire shattered what little restraint he possessed. He never let her out of his sight. Sherry did not notice the car following her down the road. She pulled into the driveway and stopped at the mailbox. Bell wasted no time.
Tell me the way to...
He had taken Sherry completely by surprise.
Come on, you're going with me! Please, go! Hey, yeah, you know, Timmy,
He brought Sherry to the Shepherd's house on Lake Murray. Bell then canceled dinner with friends. He told them he wanted to stay at the Shepherd's and watch a baseball game. He had already tied Sherry to the bed. The evidence showed that Sherry had been raped. Before killing her, Bell coerced Sherry to write her last will and testament. "12 hours after she disappeared, he covered her mouth with duct tape and suffocated her. Investigators believed that she was dead by 4:58 a.m., the time Bell claimed that their souls became one. It took less than 1 hour for 12 South Carolinians to find Bell guilty of first-degree murder. Myers prosecuted Bell in a separate trial for the murder of 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick. He was found guilty a second time. With Bell's conviction, the Smith family could begin to rebuild their lives.
There was a sense of relief that, okay, now he can't do this to me, he can't do this to anybody else, and he will be put away.
Larry Gene Bell paid the ultimate price for his sadistic crimes. On October 4th, 1996, he was put to death in South Carolina's electric chair. Though the loss of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Helmick will always be felt, life in Lexington has slowly returned to normal. With skill and determination, the South Carolina law enforcement community and the FBI brought closure to a grieving town by ending the deadly game of cat and mouse. In Memphis, Tennessee, a horrible crime terrified local residents. Most never heard the young mother's screams. but they felt the loss. As local authorities searched for the perpetrator, they found many who had motive. Investigators were forced to consider whether this was a random act of violence or a crime of deliberate calculation.
When a wealthy young woman was abducted in front of her in-laws' home, the police had no shortage of suspects. The 25-year-old victim left behind a tumultuous marriage, an ex-husband, and old boyfriends. All were on the FBI's short list. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As suspects are interviewed, the case grew no clearer. To find the woman and her abductor, investigators would have to first determine the motive.
Tunica County, Mississippi, just south of Memphis, Tennessee, is America's third largest gambling destination. 25-year-old Shannon Sanderson had recently become one of the regulars. On April 19th, 1996, the housewife from nearby Memphis, Tennessee, visited her favorite casino. Shannon was having a good night. She managed to turn $500 into $5,000 at the high-stakes blackjack table. At 3:30 a.m., she cashed out and headed home.
Sure. Can I have security? Security.
When players win big, most casinos provide a security escort to protect customers from theft. This casino was no exception. Upon Shannon's request, a guard followed her to the parking area.
Oh, great.
It was an hour's drive to Shannon's home in Memphis through secluded roads. She knew the route well. She loved to win, but could afford to lose. Less than a year earlier, she'd married her boss, a multi-millionaire who was 33 years her senior. Earlier that evening, she had dropped off her 3 young children from her previous marriage at the home of their grandparents in northeast Memphis. It was about 4:45 a.m. when Shannon pulled into the grandparents' driveway to pick up her children. She needed to get them off to school on time in the morning.
Did you hear that?
Inside the house, Shannon's former in-laws were awakened by a piercing scream. Her former father-in-law rushed to the window to see Shannon struggling with someone in a baseball cap. He raced to assist her. Neighbors also heard the commotion and witnessed the crime. Within seconds, the mother of 3 had been abducted less than 50 feet from the front door. The distraught grandfather called 911. Memphis police were immediately dispatched. In kidnapping cases, a quick response can mean the difference between life and death. Police arrived within minutes and interviewed Shannon's former father-in-law. Memphis police captain Richard David Wolson, a sergeant at the time, recalls that the shaken man did his best to recall what he had seen.
Her ex-father-in-law heard a commotion and observed a car driving away. At the same time, some other neighbors on the street heard the commotion and also looked out and saw a car drive away and gave a description of the driver and a description of the car.
Despite the dim light, witnesses agreed that the driver had worn a red baseball cap. but their descriptions of the vehicle varied. Some described it vaguely as dark-colored and sporty.
She was by herself. Yeah.
Another witness was certain that it was a maroon Chevy
She
Beretta.
dropped the kids off by herself too, so.
None of them could describe the driver's face.
It was, like I said, that was hard.
On the driveway, close to the street, police found 2 metal buttons assumed to have been torn from Shannon's clothing. Close by, they recovered a single artificial fingernail. The victim's car was searched, but police found nothing to suggest the identity of her abductor or Shannon's whereabouts. Her ex-father-in-law had seen Shannon earlier that evening when she had dropped off her children. He and his wife had agreed to babysit their grandchildren while Shannon celebrated her new husband's birthday at the casino.
You guys, what's going on? Man, it's good to see you.
Their former daughter-in-law had divorced their son less than a year before. Still, their relationship with her remained amicable, and she visited regularly with the children.
It's pretty good, all right?
Shannon's former father-in-law told police the name of the casino where Shannon and her new husband liked to play. The casino confirmed she'd been there and won $5,000, but no one could say if she was with anyone in particular. Later that day, news that the mother of 3 was abducted just steps from where her children slept horrified local residents, according to Memphis District Attorney Jerry Kitchen.
She appeared to be a person who was very conscious about the upbringing of her children because she had returned back to Memphis to pick her children up to make sure that they got to school.
Memphis police questioned Shannon's ex-husband, who was the father of her 3 children.
Is anybody here with you after 11:30? No, sir. Okay.
All right, yeah. No, thanks for brothers. Give me a gentleman a minute. Thanks, sweetie.
He was at work when the abduction occurred in front of his parents' home. Though his relationship with Shannon had been stormy, they remained married for almost 8 years. They finally divorced after Shannon fell in love with her present husband.
Call her in the evening.
Memphis police were reluctant to eliminate him as a suspect so early in the investigation, though Shannon's ex-husband's alibi was solid.
Who knows the reason why people get a divorce, but there's always I've never heard of a good divorce. She still made him pay alimony, even though she was married to a wealthy person.
And join us.
Police looked to her present husband to learn more. Since he was a multimillionaire, they considered the possibility that Shannon may have been kidnapped for ransom.
He owned a large security company here in Memphis, and he was well known. Everybody wanted to help him because they knew him or knew of him. And being that he was wealthy, she would be a prime target to be kidnapped for money.
So far, he had received no ransom call or letter. He'd been distraught since being woken at 5 a.m. with the news of his wife's abduction. Regrettably, the last time they'd spoken that night, they'd had a fight.
Engaged in whatever she was doing.
Happy birthday to you.
It was his 58th birthday, and his teenage daughters from a previous marriage had stopped by to celebrate.
Happy birthday to you.
That same evening, his wife Shannon had planned to take him to the casino.
Hello?
Hi, sweetie.
After dropping off her children, she called to say that she was on the way to pick him up. He told her he wasn't ready. His daughters were there, and he wanted to spend more time with them before going out.
No.
Shannon became angry. According to her husband, she felt he was putting his children ahead of their plans. He told her he could be ready in a half hour, but she hung up on him.
Hello?
He expected that she'd cool down and pick him up. But when he tried to call later, she did not answer.
She and I are just
Sit down.
I guess there's just such a difference in our age.
Police asked if he knew anyone who might want to harm Shannon.
The last thing she said to me was something.
The husband mentioned an ex-boyfriend against whom Shannon had filed charges of harassment a year earlier. He believed the ex-boyfriend drove a Chevy Beretta. At headquarters, police checked with DMV, but found no records that her ex-boyfriend or any of his family owned a Beretta. A criminal background check did confirm that a judge had ordered her ex-lover to have no contact with Shannon over the past year. Investigators went to question Shannon's ex-boyfriend, but he was not at home, nor had he shown up for work. His sister lived in the same neighborhood, a few blocks from where Shannon had been abducted. She reported that she had seen a suspicious car drive past her house on the night of the crime.
No, we haven't heard anything yet.
She was out on the porch around the time of the abduction when a maroon Chevy Beretta sped by, heading out of the neighborhood. She said she didn't recognize the driver at first.
Did you happen to notice?
But when she saw a photo of Shannon's wealthy husband in a news report, she was sure it was him. Though Memphis police had first considered the possibility that Shannon had been abducted for ransom, they now began to consider another possibility.
It's always in the back of your mind due to her being married to a wealthy person and the difference in their ages that something could have happened to her to get rid of her. We just didn't know, so we tried to cover every angle that we could.
Memphis police asked Shannon's husband to provide a formal statement.
The reason I've asked you here today.
With his lawyer present, he filled in detectives about his relationship with Shannon. Police knew that he had met Shannon while she was still married, working at the security company he owned.
Here's your copy, sir. Be careful.
She worked for him, but soon their relationship took a personal turn. Their romance led to marriage, but the magic didn't last long.
There's nothing else that you can think of.
9 months later, they began negotiating a postnuptial agreement outlining terms in the event the troubled union broke. Both had previous marriages that ended in divorce, and Shannon needed to feel certain that she would retain custody of her children. They'd filed it just 10 days before Shannon's abduction.
Feeling sufficiently well to come to.
Shannon's husband emphasized that it was his wife who wanted the agreement. He claimed money was not the issue since they kept separate bank accounts.
You do realize that by refusing.
When police asked, the husband agreed to reinforce his statement with a polygraph.
This meeting.
To cover all possibilities, police checked local morgues, jails, and hospitals. But after a week, investigators had no solid leads to Shannon's whereabouts. Police in Memphis received dozens of calls from local residents. Most were well-intentioned but unproductive.
And your name again?
All had to be checked.
Yes, ma'am, and thanks for the call.
One was from a woman named Sharon Powers in nearby Clarksdale, Mississippi, 80 miles south of Memphis.
The abduction was reported in the paper and on the news, and a description of the car was given. She had contacted the Memphis Police Department saying that she thought that maybe her husband was involved because of the description of the car.
She told Mississippi police that she believed her husband, Lee, may fit the suspect description. The day after the crime was reported, he had worn a red cap and left town in their red Chevy Beretta to see his mother. The woman said that she and her husband had been fighting. Police asked her to have him call when he returned. They weren't optimistic. Her report sounded like a possible domestic dispute unrelated to the crime. On May 3, 1996, police responded to another call from a concerned citizen trying to help. At a casino in Tunica County, Mississippi, a witness believed he had spotted Shannon Sanderson dressed as a casino employee But when an officer approached her, he realized that it was a case of mistaken identity. It was one more call among hundreds of false leads that frustrated the investigation.
Appreciate you calling.
After 2 weeks of searching, local investigators were no closer to finding the missing mother of 3. Her family was left only with the hope that she was still alive. In the spring of 1996, Memphis police continued their search for 25-year-old Shannon Sanderson, who had been abducted from the front of her former in-law's home. Investigators had questioned her wealthy husband, past lovers, and area residents, but none offered clues to her whereabouts. In any investigation, authorities try first to eliminate those people closest to the victim. After more than 2 weeks of searching, Memphis Police Captain Richard David Rolson feared that time was running out.
Due to her past boyfriends and lovers, we just didn't know what happened, but as the days went by, the chances of finding her alive were slimmer and slimmer.
On May 6th, Shannon's ex-boyfriend finally came in for questioning.
Friend of yours? No.
He had only recently completed his year-long probation of harassment charges against Shannon. He claimed to be asleep in his mother's house at the time of her abduction. According to the ex-boyfriend, he avoided Shannon as his probation required, but Shannon continued to call him, complaining that she wasn't happy with her new marriage. He added that he would have to talk to his lawyer before agreeing to take a polygraph. He remained a potential suspect. But as with Shannon's husband, no hard evidence existed to prove nor disprove his involvement. Then, on May 9th, 1996, 40 miles south from where Shannon had been abducted, sheriffs in DeSoto County, Mississippi were called to a rural plot of land in the town of Eudora. Two people had been inspecting their new property when they noticed a strong odor. Then they discovered a woman's decomposing body. The DeSoto County crime scene technicians set up a grid around the immediate area.
Item.
They conducted a line search, looking for anything that might be a clue.
Go.
They labeled and recorded every item they came across as they drew closer to the body. 15 feet away, they found a woman's high-heeled shoe.
Go.
Closer to the body, they marked the location of another. DeSoto sheriffs checked their records, but found no women reported missing locally. They broadened their search to include larger towns and cities in the region. When they contacted Memphis authorities, police there told them that a 25-year-old mother of 3 named Shannon Sanderson had been missing for more than 2 weeks. DeSoto deputies learned that she was blonde, approximately 5'5", 130 pounds, had a small tattoo, and was last seen wearing a dress, high heels, a jacket with metal buttons, and pink artificial fingernails.
Looks good so far.
That description fit the body, but they needed an autopsy to confirm her identity and cause of death. The medical examiner determined that the victim had been killed by a single .25 caliber bullet to the right temple.
And you're bagging it, right?
Yes, sir. Date and time.
The victim's clothes were removed and preserved to check for trace evidence that might lead to the killer. The body, dead an estimated 2 to 3 weeks, was too decomposed to recognize. But over her left breast, examiners found a small tattoo that was still visible. It said, "I love you, Robert." Shannon Sanderson had such a tattoo. The medical examiner compared her dental records to x-rays from the body.
Okay, definitely X-rays.
They confirmed the ID. This was Shannon Sanderson's body. The abduction was now officially a homicide. In Memphis, Assistant District Attorney Jerry Kitchen was called in. His first task would be to somehow narrow the suspect list the police had developed over the past 3 weeks.
Here in Memphis, it's somewhat unusual in that we have relatively few murder cases that we would classify as mystery homicides, where someone's not either developed as a suspect rather quickly or arrested soon after the incident. But in this particular case, it was a mystery homicide with numerous suspects that were listed as potentially being involved in the abduction and killing of the victim.
The Assistant District Attorney first called the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to conduct polygraph examinations to help eliminate potential suspects. He also contacted the FBI, since Shannon's body was found across the Tennessee state line. Supervisory Special Agent Jennifer Aiken from the FBI's Memphis field office was assigned as case agent.
They felt they needed some additional resources. The case was a very difficult case across jurisdictions, and they wanted the FBI to be involved as part of the team working towards a solution, because it was not an easy case.
Memphis authorities hoped that Agent Aiken's experience would help unravel the complexities of this case. Local residents were fearful that Shannon's killer was still out there, not knowing if or when he would strike again. In the spring of 1996, the body of 25-year-old Shannon Sanderson, a mother of 3, was found in Eudora, Mississippi, 40 miles from her Memphis, Tennessee home. The FBI, together with state and local investigators, needed to shorten the lengthy suspect list that included Shannon's husband and past lovers. Assistant District Attorney Jerry Kitchen hoped polygraph examinations could help focus their search.
This investigation was difficult in that there were a lot of suspects in this particular case. Throughout the victim's life, she had, of course, been divorced. And naturally, in any type of murder case, you do focus in and you do look at relatives or acquaintances or husbands, any type of relationship that the victim may have been involved in that could lead back to some type of dispute or domestic violence.
Tennessee state authorities tested several of Shannon's ex-lovers. They asked them their whereabouts on the night of the abduction. They asked directly if they had abducted or killed Shannon. All denied any involvement. The tests revealed no deception. Investigators corroborated their alibis and eliminated them as potential suspects.
You intend to answer truthfully and deliberately withholding any.
They also polygraphed the witness who claimed to have seen Shannon's current husband driving a maroon Chevy Beretta in the neighborhood moments before the abduction occurred. It was the same type of vehicle other witnesses had described that Shannon was forced into. But the woman was found to be deceptive.
These are Becky's charts. Her test.
Though police now believed her claim was false, that she had seen Shannon's husband driving the getaway vehicle, they also knew that Shannon's brief marriage with her wealthy husband had been rocky. They wanted to confirm once and for all that he had not been involved in any way.
This question about honesty and what she is.
This crime occurred at 4 o'clock in the morning. The victim's husband had indicated that he went to bed and that there was no one else that he was with. And so he really had no alibi. And so that was an area that was difficult for us to get over because we could not lock down exactly where he was and what he was doing without other than what he was telling us.
Investigators contacted Shannon's husband to be polygraphed. Though he had previously agreed to do so, on advice from his lawyer, he declined. Heart medication that he was taking may have induced a false reading, according to his lawyer.
Are you feeling? Do you have any objections?
For Captain Rolson, the husband's refusal didn't alleviate the suspicions that surrounded him.
You couldn't understand, if he didn't have anything to do with it, why he wouldn't be wanting to cooperate. And being a homicide detective, you're suspicious, and it just made him that more suspicious.
In terms of incriminating evidence, the investigation was at a standstill. Supervisory Special Agent Jennifer Aiken hoped to refocus the investigation by examining leads that may have been overlooked.
We have to look at all of the possibilities, and that's, part of the battle in the beginning is not to get too far down the road in speculating about what kind of guy this could be, and what, what his relationship or, non-relationship would be to the victim. What we did then is identify what other possibilities do we still need to explore.
One possibility, though not a promising one, was Sharon Powers, who earlier reported that her husband may have matched the vague description of the suspect.
Get some more information about it.
I don't believe he is.
But now she wasn't so sure about her previous claim. She told police she'd overreacted, reinforcing their belief that she'd only been trying to get back at her husband for leaving her.
Yeah, so it couldn't have been him.
She said that her husband had left town, that they had had some, marital disputes. They felt that perhaps this report was really just sort of sour grapes and that she was trying to get her husband, maybe estranged husband, into trouble of some kind. And so they really just simply did not know how much weight to give this rather conflicting and kind of half-hearted story that she was telling.
Though her husband wasn't a serious suspect, police wanted to talk with him. A bulletin for Gerald Lee Powers was issued that he was wanted for questioning in Tennessee. FBI agents and Tennessee investigators met to review the casino surveillance tape of the blackjack table where Shannon had won the now missing $5,000. Her growing pile of chips would certainly make her an attractive target. They viewed the tape to see if a stalker could be seen. But if that was the killer's intention, Agent Aiken questioned why he would wait so long to make his move.
Clearly, she had been winning for a while. She was there late at night. There were a number of factors that made her visit to that casino rather high risk. And yet we had this abduction occurring almost an hour to an hour and a half after she left that environment. So first we had to determine, did it have anything or nothing to do with her visit to that casino?
The tape showed Shannon, but was inadequate to reveal whether she was being stalked. Investigators were no closer to finding the truth. As they contemplated what to do next, the investigation veered in an unexpected direction. On May 22, 1996, near Hebronville, Texas, 750 miles from where Shannon was seen forced into a car described as a Chevy Beretta, a vehicle fitting that description erratically swerved away from a border checkpoint. The vehicle had Mississippi plates. One of the patrol guards raced after it, believing the driver to be a potential border jumper or smuggler. In May of 1996, as the investigation continued into the kidnapping and murder of a young Tennessee mother, U.S. Border Patrol agents chased down a fleeing maroon Chevy Beretta with Mississippi plates, the type of car described by witnesses in the abduction. Caught at a dead end, the suspect resisted.
Drop it! Drop the knife! Up against the car! Up against the car!
Then backed down when confronted by the agent's gun.
the other hand. Give me the other hand.
He had 14 $100 bills in his pocket.
Really?
The driver said his name was Gerald Lee Powers, but held no driver's license to prove it. A cursory search of the car revealed no illegal drugs or aliens. But in the trunk, border agents recovered a stolen weapon registered in Arkansas. The car was locked and remained in that spot under armed guard until FBI agents could conduct a more thorough search. Special Agent Evan Ray from the FBI field office in Laredo, Texas was contacted since assaulting a Border Patrol officer is a federal offense. Agent Ray confirmed the identity of the driver when he learned that Gerald Lee Powers had been involved in another altercation at the Mexican border.
I spoke to U.S. Customs Service officials who had indicated that they had had an incident that day as well in which an individual had fled and had left several pieces of identification behind on the counter when they fled. And so we were then in possession of several pieces of identification of Mr. Powers.
A license plate check revealed that the vehicle was registered to his wife Sharon in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Agent Ray also discovered that Gerald Lee Powers had a violent past and was currently wanted for questioning in the abduction and murder of Shannon Sanderson. After contacting Memphis authorities, he traveled to Hebronville to process Powers' car on site. The Chevy Beretta matched the vehicle witnesses had described at the abduction. Agents hoped something inside would link the vehicle and Powers to the murder of Shannon Sanderson. A sheet and pillowcase, along with the trunk liner, were bundled into evidence bags.
All right, let's tape this stuff up. We'll get it back to headquarters.
When you're retrieving evidence like that, you have no idea what the results of the laboratory examinations are going to be in the end. You just try to get the best and the most evidence that you can and let the lab do their job.
Agents were less hopeful they'd find something in the car's interior since it appeared to have been recently cleaned and vacuumed. Hundreds of miles from the nearest evidence response team, Agent Ray improvised with the tools he had at hand.
One item that we needed to search for were hairs and fibers in the back seat area. We didn't have the specialized equipment that the evidence response team would have, and so I used an unopened lint roller that I had at the office of the type one might use on a suit as an adhesive lift.
Initially obscured by the front seat, the agent found a pink artificial fingernail on the floor. It was similar to those the victim had worn at the time of her abduction. Memphis prosecutor Jerry Kitchen believed this could be the clue that could definitely place Shannon Sanderson in Powers' car.
Agent Ray had called us and told us that he had found a fingernail in the back seat area of the floorboard of this vehicle, which is where we had felt that, based upon the witnesses' information they had given us, that the victim had been placed in the back seat of the vehicle that took her away.
Memphis authorities came to Laredo to question Gerald Lee Powers about the murder. Powers told them that he knew nothing more than what he'd heard on the news. He admitted to being at the casino that night, but had left early to check on his terminally ill neighbor. While the interview continued, investigators spoke to his neighbor in Clarksdale, Mississippi, who denied that Powers had been there at that time.
We weren't 100% convinced Gerald Powers was our suspect. We just felt it was kind of suspicious that he was trying to give a false alibi, and that, of course, the neighbor was very ill and could have been mistaken because he had been there at different times.
Investigators hoped that Powers' wife, Sharon, might be able to corroborate the neighbor's statement. She had initially told police her husband fit the description of the suspect who witnesses glimpsed at the abduction. A man who wore a red baseball cap. Now she added that he made frequent trips to the casino where the victim had spent her last night. Still, she did not know if he had visited their neighbor that night and denied that her husband had anything to do with the abduction and murder of Shannon Sanderson.
He treated you okay? Oh, yeah.
Investigators feared they might just be wasting their time. But FBI Special Agent Jennifer Aiken wasn't so sure.
We sensed her ambivalence. We knew that she, had come forward, even with her kind of half-hearted story. We knew she'd come forward for a reason and that there was more she needed to tell.
Seconds later, Gerald Lee Powers.
Agent Aiken realized that she would need to invest a great deal of time to develop the trust of Sharon Powers.
It's tremendous.
As the dialogue with Sharon Powers continued over several weeks, the FBI contacted Tom Scott, director of surveillance at the casino where the victim had gambled prior to her abduction. Scott was asked to confirm if Gerald Lee Powers had been recorded that same night on any of the 600 cameras in the 95,000 square foot casino.
Jennifer Aiken from the FBI gave us a basic description of what the suspect possibly was wearing on the night in question. And that's what we went with as a general description, from color shoes to jeans to a certain type jacket and possibly a ball cap. Any given day, you can have approximately 3,000 to 10,000 people within a casino.
Scott and his team searched hundreds of hours of footage, looking for a man in a red baseball cap and yellow shirt. Their main focus was the blackjack table where Shannon spent most of the night.
If the suspect was stationary, it's pretty easy. But in a casino, it's quite an exciting place to be in, and everybody kind of wanders around. And they go to slot machine to slot machine, or restaurants, or table games. We could not locate the individual.
Investigators looked to Sharon Powers for more detail about her husband's activities that night. They did what they could to make her feel comfortable. One of her neighbors, a police officer, provided her with reassurance and support. She was a woman, torn between her empathy for the victim and her feelings towards her husband.
She was in love with this man. I think it was difficult for Sharon to accept the fact that the victim had been a mother of 3 young children. She herself was a mother of 3 children, and very much related to the victim.
Slowly, Sharon Powers worked through her internal conflict. She began to open up, revealing what her home life was like with her husband, Gerald Lee Powers. She said he ruled the house. Her 3 kids from previous marriages were afraid of him. Sharon admitted that she was too. He kept a bell on his chair. When he rang it, Sharon came running. Despite his controlling temper, her feelings for him were deep.
This is a woman who had really kind of lived under the thumb of Gerald Lee Powers for a number of years. I believe by then they had been married 4 or 5 years. And she, I don't want to say liked it that way, but that was what she was used to. That was familiar. It was not familiar to her to be breaking with him, to be disloyal.
Despite her fear, Sharon continued to open up to investigators. On April 19th, the day Shannon Sanderson was abducted, Gerald came home acting nervous.
Said shut up and sit down.
Sharon was angry because she thought he'd spent the night with another woman.
What's on your shirt?
Don't worry about it.
She noticed blood on his shirt and a cut on his arm. He claimed he'd fallen down at a casino he'd been visiting.
Do you remember what color the shirt was?
Sharon didn't believe what he told her, but she didn't press it. For now, Sharon refused to say any more, and neither would her husband. Without something stronger, prosecutor Jerry Kitchen would be unable to press charges on Gerald Lee Powers.
We still didn't have anything concrete that he had been involved in. It was just instinct. I think that was leading us at this point that he was our man, but at the time we did not have the results back from the lab.
Investigators hoped the FBI would reinforce their hunch that Gerald Lee Powers was responsible for leaving Shannon Sanderson's children motherless. In the summer of 1996, after Gerald Lee Powers was indicted for assaulting a Border Patrol officer in Texas, the FBI and Memphis investigators suspected he was also responsible for the murder of a 25-year-old mother of 3. But lacking physical evidence, Memphis prosecutor Jerry Kitchen was unable to charge Powers for his involvement, or to know for certain if one of the victim's former lovers had hired him to commit the crime.
There was always that possibility. The way she was killed and the manner in which she was abducted, that it appeared like it wasn't just something random, that it had been something planned. All the other suspects that appeared to have a motive or possibly emotional reasons why someone would want to have someone killed, like jealousy or rage or other factors.
What river?
Investigators hoped the suspect's wife, Sharon Powers, could tell them more. Though reluctant at first, after many meetings over several weeks, Sharon grew more comfortable. She finally opened up to FBI Special Agent Jennifer Aiken.
When she finally told the story in its entirety, what we heard was really a chilling tale of his stalking of the victim and the abduction of the victim, and then taking her to this rural area and robbing her of not only the $5,000 that she had won that night, but also of the jewelry that she was wearing.
Sharon's story was strong, but without corroborating evidence, it would not be enough to convict or even indict Gerald Lee Powers for murder. Trying to help, she told investigators that her husband had thrown the murder weapon, a handgun, into an abandoned canal near the casino in Mississippi. Memphis Police Captain Richard Rolson accompanied local divers to help search for the handgun.
Sheriff's Department's divers dove into this hole and crawled inch by inch searching for this pistol. We never did locate it. And then that's when Miss Powers told us that he had thrown it into the river, which was about 100 yards away. The current at that location was too swift for anybody to dive in the Mississippi River.
It left investigators with more doubt and no corroboration that Sharon Powers was telling them the truth. The suspect's wife also told them about a school bus driver from Mississippi whom her husband believed had seen him close to where he dumped Shannon's body.
Did you happen to notice the driver?
No, I didn't notice.
Police tracked down the driver who confirmed Sharon's story. At 7 a.m., about 2 hours after Shannon Sanderson had been abducted, the driver noticed a maroon Chevy Beretta backing down the dirt roadway of the vacant property where the victim's body was later found. The bus driver remembered it because the property had been vacant for so long.
Okay, that's what we need to know.
But the driver didn't see who was in the car and didn't get the license plate.
But I did notice the car.
Searching for further corroboration, investigators turned to Tom Scott, director of surveillance at the casino. This time, Sharon Powers provided them locations of where to look for her husband in the 95,000 square foot casino.
We did a recreation and did a walkthrough on where, if we were the suspect, where we would have gone through certain areas. And we pulled some tapes. Eventually, we were able to identify just from his shoes in a particular location where the suspect was standing. We pulled a bunch more shots, connected the shoes. We finally put some legs to the shoes, and we're able to identify a person in a distant shot walking through the casino from the upstairs looking down towards the suspect. We then connected more shots and followed the suspect down an escalator, walking past the table where this victim was playing, and followed the suspect out through our front door on videotape.
The video was compelling and confirmed Gerald Lee Powers was in the casino that night, but it didn't prove that he had abducted or murdered Shannon Sanderson. Hoping for physical evidence that would connect Powers to the victim, investigators searched behind a tavern in Mississippi where Powers' wife claimed he had buried the victim's jewelry. The suspect had told her they were wrapped in tinfoil under a couch in the back. Just as Mrs. Powers described, investigators located a small bundle of foil. Inside, they found pink plastic wrap holding rings identified by the victim's husband as belonging to Shannon. Now they needed to prove forensically that Gerald Lee Powers had in fact been the one who wrapped them. Investigators went to Powers' home to search for the source of that plastic. In the kitchen, they found a roll of pink wrap. They forwarded the roll along with the bundled rings to the lab for comparison. While they waited for the results, investigators turned their attention to the pink artificial nail found inside Powers' car after he was arrested in Texas. From autopsy photos, investigators found at least 2 nails were missing from the victim's hand. If the nail from the car matched those remaining on the victim's hand, it would prove that Shannon had been in Powers' car that night. But there was a problem. Shannon had already been buried, and her husband was against exhuming her remains.
She had already been interred, and so we had a hearing in court to have her disinterred and to have the ability to examine these fingernails to see if they were in fact her fingernails or not.
Against her husband's wishes, the judge ordered the body exhumed. In early July, 3 months after the murder, investigators retrieved the body of Shannon Sanderson. Her remaining artificial nails were removed and sent to the lab for comparison with the others. The results were negative. The nail in the car wasn't hers. Investigators hoped the other evidence at the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. would provide more promising results. Inside the tinfoil ball recovered in Mississippi, examiners removed the pink plastic wrap wound tightly around some rings. The FBI needed to connect the rings physically to Gerald Lee Powers. To do so, examiners compared the plastic they were wrapped in to the sample retrieved from Powers' home.
The FBI agent who examined it indicated that it wasn't the exact piece that was torn off, but that it matched that roll exactly as far as the polymers and the dye and all that, which showed that this was the source that the material had come from that was wrapped around the rings.
It was the first piece of forensic evidence linking Powers to the victim. But the case was by no means complete. More compelling proof came from a single fiber among several found in Powers' otherwise immaculate car.
We have dress fiber that was found in the vehicle that he was driving that night that matches the fiber from the dress that the victim was wearing. And that was very significant as well.
Authorities were convinced that Gerald Lee Powers had murdered Shannon Sanderson, but they weren't convinced he'd acted alone. They believed it was possible that others from her past could claim a motive for wanting Shannon dead. Memphis prosecutor Jerry Kitchen decided to confirm it with Powers himself.
So we went to Laredo to interview the defendant before we charged him with this murder. And there was the possibility, if he cooperated and was able to prove to us that someone else was involved, that we would withdraw seeking the death penalty. But there was nothing that he was able to provide us with, so we were convinced then at that point that no one else had been involved in her abduction and murder. and proceeded with charging him alone.
Powers had plenty of time to contemplate this murder. He watched her for several hours in the casino, then followed her for another hour back to Memphis. He had ample time to change his mind. Instead, he hardened his resolve.
Get out of there!
He abducted a mother of 3, robbed her, then shot her at point blank. The criminal court in Tennessee didn't need much time to decide Powers' fate. After deliberating only 15 minutes, the jury recommended death for the murder of Shannon Sanderson. Gerald Lee Powers awaits execution at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Tennessee.
I started out as a prosecutor when I was a baby. I was 23 years old. And for 21 years, I fought for justice for victims on every single case I ever handled, always trying to do the right thing. And then for the last case of my career at the DA's office, to be accused of what I was accused of and to have to see a family that didn't deserve to have any of this happen to them have to put up with it too, it was pretty awful. On January the 11th, 1999, the murder of Belinda Temple, who was 8 months pregnant with a little baby girl, shocked everyone in Katy, Texas, and changed a lot of people's lives. Prosecuting this case was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my whole career. This trial made my life a living hell for a long time, because I was accused of withholding evidence and sending an innocent man to prison. I couldn't believe it. Up until that time, no one said ugly things about me as a prosecutor. I was the golden girl. But on this case, I was not only fighting for justice for Belinda and her baby, I also had to fight for my own career and my own reputation. I felt sorry for myself. I got mad. I lost friends. But I tried to always tell myself just to shut up and grow up and suck it up, because the real concern here is what all this did to Belinda's family. They didn't just have to go through losing her and the baby and waiting for the charges to get filed and waiting for the trial to happen because of all the mess. They had to do it all again. And it was just really, really sad. So I think it's time for people to hear the truth of exactly what happened to Belinda's family and to me, to finally get that justice for Belinda and her baby. It's time to let the souls of Belinda and Aaron in heaven rest in peace.
Harris County 911 Police Fire Ambulance.
Yes, somebody's broken into my house and my wife has been shot.
Stay on the line for the ambulance, sir.
Her brain is on the floor. I think she's already dead. She's 8 months pregnant.
Around 5:30 in the evening, Sarge come in and told us they had a homicide at a location in Katy.
When we first arrived at the scene, David Temple was sitting on a bench in the backyard, and his dog was loose.
Temple's had a chow that was not real friendly. You couldn't get anywhere near the house. He wasn't going to let you in.
After Mr. Temple secured the dog, we detained him in a marked unit.
According to the homeowner, David Temple, his wife is upstairs in her master closet, dead, with her brains blown out.
Constable's office already had secured the scene, and a couple of us did enter the residence.
It looks like there was forced entry to the back door.
First, we went up the stairs to the master bedroom. To the left of the main bathroom was a large walk-in closet, which is where we saw Belinda's body. Feet closest to the door and her head toward the wall. There was a significant amount of brain matter there on the wall and between the clothing. This was vicious. This was brutal.
It's clear, I mean, it was a shotgun blast because there's pellets on the ground, there's shotgun wadding and brain matter all over the wall. We did find 2 guns in the closet, both of them rifles. They were behind some clothing in the corner, but no shotguns.
As we went through the first floor, we saw that there was a television lying by the table and it's still plugged in.
We also see the drawers were open, but everything was neat and tidy in the drawers.
If this is in fact a burglary, it was botched because a burglar is going to take whatever they can find to carry out of a house.
Right away, investigators are noticing things that the average person doesn't notice and appreciating that things just aren't quite adding up.
One thing about the forced entry to the back door is if the door was in a closed position and someone from outside forced entry by breaking the glass to get in to turn the knob, you would expect to see the glass going in that direction. The glass was not where it should be. In this case, all the glass is shattered to the left in front of the fireplace.
Therefore, the door had to have been open when the glass was broken.
We needed to get a statement from David. He's supposedly the last to see her alive, first to see her dead. Was there somebody in between there? We don't know. So I took him to the station.
In any investigation, the detectives want to try and get statements from all the witnesses they can as soon as possible, because that way everything that just happened is very fresh in their mind.
While I was talking to David, he certainly did not appear to be grieving. He had no tears in his eyes weren't bubbling up. He was cordial in talking with me back and forth. He went through the story. He teaches at one school, his wife teaches at another. His son was at a daycare and he was sick. His wife had to go pick him up. David said she dropped by his family's house, and while there she picked up some soup and brought it home. When she got home, she said she was tired. So David decides to take the child out to a park and then go shopping. I had asked him what park he went to. There's 2 different parks, and he was mixed up on what park he had taken him to. And then he said after they played at the park for just a short time, he went to Brookshire Brothers to go shopping. And then he went to Home Depot. After he left Home Depot, he went home. And as he's coming out of the garage, he notices the window is shattered on the back door. So he immediately picks Evan up, his son, and takes him across the street to his neighbor's house and tells him there's something going on at the house. Watch the child.
911, go ahead, ma'am. Yes, somebody has broken into my neighbor's house, and he wanted me to call you. Where's your neighbor at right now? Him and my husband went back to the house.
Between the different things in the house not seeming to add up to a burglary and the holes in David Temple's story that just don't make sense, it's just natural that the detectives would need to ask him more questions.
Now we go back in and talk to him, and we're saying, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look right. This is where he starts getting agitated. And I said, the only thing to really clarify this would be if you'd agree to take a polygraph, and that's where he stopped. I ain't doing that. I don't have anything else to say. I want an attorney.
I think a polygraph is a tool to show you how cooperative someone really is. So if your wife and your unborn daughter have been brutally murdered, and you want to cooperate and you want to find out who did it, why wouldn't you take a polygraph? Why wouldn't you hurry up and take a polygraph so they can check that box and move on to find the real killer?
And of course, I called the DA, and the DA said, yeah, we just don't have enough. Just because he doesn't want to take a polygraph's not a probable cause to arrest him. So we have to let him go.
When David Temple walked out of the station that night, the detectives didn't know if an innocent man was walking out or a cold-blooded killer.
She did not kick off her shoes. She didn't go up to bed and take off her glasses. She was killed before either of those two things happened.
David Temple's family brings up a name of a brand new suspect.
What's he doing up north that he's not telling us about?
Was he up there to possibly dispose of a shotgun?
What are they trying to hide? And maybe there is way more to this relationship than he's ever told anybody, which, you know, kind of gives you a motive.
I fell through the ground. I didn't make a sound.
January the 11th of 1999 was the worst day of my life. I get a phone call from Belinda's father-in-law, Ken Temple. Kenny said, Belinda's been murdered. To get the news over the phone that your twin sister's been murdered, that was the worst news I could have ever gotten. Her world revolved around her son Evan, and she was so excited about having a little girl, Erin. Such a senseless tragedy. I never thought something like this would happen to Belinda.
By the next day, Belinda Temple's murder was the lead story because it was so unbelievable.
This morning, the students and faculty at Katy High School are shocked and saddened by the death of teacher Belinda Temple, who was found shot in her home last night.
There was a lot of news coverage with the students talking about how much they loved her. Even if they weren't in her class, they would go by. Hey, Miss Lucas, how are you? You know, she would go into the gym and shoot basketball with them. She impacted everybody that she met.
This case got a lot of press because Belinda was everybody's sweetheart. And David Temple had been the biggest star of the football team at Katy High School. Everybody in town knew who he was. And so when they met each other at Stephen F. Austin, fell in love and got married, everybody liked them and loved that story.
Belinda and I were born in Martins Ferry, Ohio, on December 30th of 68, and we moved to Nacogdoches, Texas in 1976. When we were born, I was 2 pounds heavier and 2 inches longer than Belinda, but it didn't take her long to catch up, and she ended up being like 3 inches taller than me. So Belinda called me Shrimpy. We did everything together. We shared a bedroom. We shared birthdays. We liked playing softball growing up. Belinda would play first base, and I played second base, and we made a lot of double plays. We were very competitive. Belinda wanted to be a teacher, and especially go into special education. She wanted to reach out and help as many people as she could that had some kind of disability.
Belinda and I met at college. Belinda and I spent an incredible amount of time together. We were roommates, and we also worked together, and then we went out together. When she first met David, I thought he was a pompous ass. He made fun of my accent and my kicking boots, so it wasn't the best first impression, but she was very happy, so, you just roll with it.
When I first met David, I knew he was a big football star. He was very popular. Had the nickname Temple of Doom.
David and Belinda both wanted to teach and coach, both athletic, both family-oriented. They both had the same goals. She loved him, and she was ready to be a wife.
Belinda seemed so happy.
The day after the murder, we witnessed the autopsy. The evidence is collected that is still with the body, like pellets from the shotgun. According to the medical examiner, it was a close contact wound with a 12-gauge shotgun to the back of Belinda's head. And yes, of course, seeing the baby removed from the womb. It's, hey, you're homicide, you're supposed to be tough, and you're supposed to... Now, if you got kids and this doesn't burn into your memory, something's wrong with you. Sorry. That'll never go away.
When we first get on an investigation, we divide up the duties. I went to Katy High School and started talking to Belinda's coworkers. I learned that they loved her, they loved working with her, she had the perfect family, she had the perfect marriage.
As the detectives from the Sheriff's Department started to look deeper into Belinda Temple's life, her friends, her job, her marriage, what they thought the story was started to change.
Tammy Harlan had been friends with Belinda, and she was one of the first people that I talked to tell me about the troubles between David and Belinda Temple. Tammy didn't like the way that David talked to Belinda. He said she was fat, and he did not talk well about her family. He called them a bunch of rednecks. He thought that his family was better than her family.
Belinda did say, he's kind of distant, and we've had some troubles. She said that they just stopped speaking to each other at home. And it was a couple of months that they did this. It was just weird to me. How do you not talk to someone you share a house with?
Belinda would confide to Tammy that she thought David might be cheating on her. Charges she saw on the credit card, times that he wasn't home.
A friend of the Temples said that David may have been seeing another girl. Her name was Heather.
She was a co-worker of David's, and there was a rumor that they had been talking in more than a friendly way.
Investigators need to track down Heather Scott to get a statement from her. If it turns out to be true that Heather Scott and David Temple are having an affair, that's going to cause more questions that need to be asked of David Temple. But at this point, David stopped cooperating with the Sheriff's Department. The next step is to look into his alibi by looking at that CCTV footage from Brookshire Brothers and at the Home Depot where he claimed he went that day. What doesn't make sense to the investigators is that David Temple chose a store 6 miles from his house when there's a grocery store much closer than that. Then they discover an important discrepancy. If he left Brookshire Brothers at 4:38 p.m. and got to the Home Depot at 5:14 p.m., that's a window of 36 minutes. But those two places are only about 10 minutes apart. So what was he doing for the rest of that time?
Belinda and Aaron were laid to rest at the First Baptist Church in Katy, Texas.
Several hundred people came to her funeral. A lot of students, I believe they had actually closed the school down early so they could attend the funeral.
Belinda's parents were there, and of course they're just devastated. They loved Belinda. They loved her. But David wasn't really crying. He wasn't really, he just sat there. I've never had a murdered spouse, so I don't know how you're supposed to act, but it's kind of weird.
While the investigation is still in the early stages, David Temple's family brings to the sheriff department's attention the possibility of another suspect.
Riley Joe Sanders was the next door neighbor. He was going to the same school that Belinda taught at. And there was some initial information that there was hard feeling between him and Belinda. We needed to get some more information.
Although David Temple's alibi still needs to be looked into a little further, another person of interest in the murder of Belinda Temple is identified.
The Temple family brought up the possibility of the neighbor boy, Riley Joe Sanders.
Riley Joe went to Katy High School and knew Belinda Temple well. She had actually helped him with some of his classes.
A couple months prior to the murder of Belinda Temple, Riley Joe's parents were gone. He had a party, and there was some broken glass in the Temple's yard. Belinda told his parents, "Your son had this party," and they grounded him. And so David Temple's family said, "You need to look at Riley Joe. He's got an axe to grind with Belinda."
I went to Katy High School, and I found out that the day that Belinda was murdered, Riley Joe was gone for part of the day. We needed to talk to him and anyone he was with and find out what was going on.
Apparently, Riley Joe had skipped his last class, and when confronted with that information, he said he was just at the house smoking dope with his friends. We talked to him at length about his relation with Belinda, and he said she was a good teacher. He liked her. We asked if he would take a polygraph, and he was really cooperative with us. He was underage, so we had to get his parents' permission to have him take a polygraph, and they were willing to do so. On all the high points of the questions, he did all right on them. He didn't fail the major question, did you shoot Belinda? But he just never could seem to pass every question. And we ended up taking 3 different polygraphs, and we were ready to take a 4th. And finally, his father stepped in and says, "You know, enough is enough. He's been on the machine 3 times. You ought to be able to get your answers by now." Unfortunately, we found out he may have been doing some marijuana at the time that could affect the outcome of the polygraph.
He was a 16-year-old kid who was nervous, and no one told him not to smoke some dope before he took the polygraph. While the investigators are still looking into this new name of Riley Joe Sanders, more information about this relationship that David Temple might be having with another teacher at his school, Heather Scott, comes forward.
During our investigation, we had learned that David and Heather were communicating a lot through email on the school's computer. So it was decided we'd go check with the DA and see if we could get a subpoena for their emails.
The investigators were able to access the school emails between David Temple and Heather Scott. David Temple writes, "When you look as good as you do, the women are pissed and the men are all chasing." So they got some flirting going on.
After reading some of the emails, they had been having an affair for a while. This wasn't a one-night stand. As a matter of fact, they had spent the weekend together New Year's Eve when David was supposedly hunting.
We also saw that Miss Scott had sent out an email to David telling him he should delete his emails to her.
What are they trying to hide? And maybe there is way more to this relationship than he's ever told anybody, which, kind of gives you a motive.
Heather Scott came to the office. My part was to get a little more detail about their relationship. Heather didn't want to admit that she was sleeping with David. Everyone knew that his wife was pregnant, and she didn't want people knowing that he was actually coming to her house on a regular basis. Heather said at one point they had tried to break it off, but after a day or two, they were back together and it was just like it was. I mentioned that if he's a suspect, you would be considered the motive. And I'll never forget, she just stopped at one point and said, "You think that he killed his wife for me?" It took something for me to continue the interview and not be ugly to her, because that was very insulting.
I couldn't believe that he would actually cheat on my sister. After that, there's no doubt in my mind he killed Belinda and Aaron.
Suspicion about David Temple having killed his wife Belinda is growing. And then the investigators get another new piece of information.
We heard from an old classmate of David Temple, his name was Buck, that said he had seen David in the Katy area on the day of Belinda's murder. So we wanted to go out and see what kind of information he had.
Around 5 on the day of the murder, Buck saw David Temple pulled up to the stop sign at Katy Hockley Cutoff. Buck had been traveling eastbound and he saw David Temple southbound. He honked his horn and waved, but David didn't respond, possibly didn't even notice him. That was very significant to us because we had video from the Brookshire brothers. We had the video from Home Depot. And then in the middle of all that, we've got him appearing at this intersection traveling southbound on Katy Hockley Cutoff, which puts him in an area where his mom and dad live and where there are a lot of rice fields and water retention ponds.
What was he doing up there? What's he doing up north that he's not telling us about?
Was he up there to possibly dispose of a shotgun? On the day of the murder, Buck saw David Temple pulled up to the stop sign at Katy Hockley Cutoff.
What's he doing up north that he's not telling us about?
Was he up there to possibly dispose of a shotgun?
After searching for a weapon for 3 or 4 days, I called the DA and told him that we just didn't have the smoking gun, and they concluded again that they wouldn't be able to file any charges until we come up with something that would link David Temple to the homicide.
The detectives thought they had enough evidence, but the prosecutors at that time were still thinking that maybe more information would come up. They were still looking for the murder weapon. They were still hoping that something new might break wide open.
And then the Belinda Temple murder case goes cold.
The stress that it put on the whole family, it was really, really tough for me to sit there and know that David Temple murdered my sister, my unborn niece, is still out walking the streets.
At that time, I was the victim advocate in the mayor's office. Belinda's parents, Tom and Carol Lucas, reached out to me for help. We had an organization called Crime Stoppers, and so we were eventually able to put out a reward. I went to the unveiling of a billboard. Tom and Carol were there. Belinda's friends were there. There was one person conspicuously not there, and that was David Temple.
David was not out there trying to find who killed his wife and baby. David went on with his life.
4 months after the murder, David Temple sold the house that he and Melinda had been living in. He bought himself a new pickup truck, and then he bought himself a new house in Richmond, Texas.
2 years after the murder, he married Heather.
Heather ended up being the person who raised Evan.
Belinda should have been raising Evan. I didn't want to be around her. It's not that I didn't love Evan. I love Evan.
So Belinda's family had no further connection or relationship at all with Evan.
It was tough. Month to month, year to year, just dealing with, is this case ever going to be taking a draw?
And then a case a lot like this one starts hitting the news all over the country, the Laci Peterson murder.
There's a lot of similarities in the Laci Peterson case and the Temple case. They were both pregnant, both school teachers. Both their husbands were having affairs.
In late 2004, the Peterson case goes to trial, and Scott is ultimately convicted of murdering Laci and their unborn child.
That gets people around the Katy, Houston area taking another look at the Belinda Temple case.
We wanted justice. Laci Peterson was getting it. We wanted it for Belinda.
Tom Lucas, Belinda's dad, called the district attorney of Harris County, Chuck Rosenthal, and told Chuck, how come California can get a verdict on a case like this, but y'all can't do your job here in Harris County? Chuck Rosenthal called me and said, Kelly, do you know what case Tom Lucas is talking about? And I said, yeah, that's that Katy football coach case. And I remember taking it home, and I read it over the weekend, and that's how I first got the case. Rhonda, how you doing?
Kelly was a top prosecutor in the office. She had a great conviction rate for murder cases.
Today, I would like to see the David Temple evidence. Oh, wow. It's a lot.
Kelly Siegler already had a notch in her belt for getting a conviction in the Susan Wright case, a pretty high-profile, dramatic case.
So here's his door. And then, you know how important this door was to that case?
Kelly's marching orders were to take a look at this case with a fresh set of eyes and see if she thought that there was enough there to move forward with an indictment.
So here's his boxes. Oh, wow. These three right here?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Rhonda.
Uh-huh.
When I read the file, I did the same thing I do now on Cold Justice. I'm taking notes for to-dos and questions and things that need to be addressed. Wow. These are the shoes that Belinda had on that day when she got off of work, still on her feet, 9 months pregnant when she went upstairs and was found in her closet. And all of her girlfriends and her sister talked about how the first thing Belinda would do when she'd get home every day is kick off her shoes, especially when they were swollen as they would have been being so pregnant. David Temple told law enforcement back then that she was taking a nap. Well, I don't think very many women 9 months pregnant take a nap with their shoes on. And she still had her glasses on. Look, that's still the brain matter and blood on her glasses. The timeline was always the big thing to make a jury understand in this case. Using the initial statement David Temple gave the night that Belinda was murdered, along with all the reports and everything gathered by the sheriff's department up until this point in the investigation, this is what was known at the time I started working on the case. David Temple said that Belinda stopped at his parents' house to pick up some soup and then got home at 3:45 p.m. Then she went upstairs to take a nap. David Temple says that Evan started to feel better, so he took him to a park to play, but he doesn't remember which park it was. Then to a grocery store. The timestamp showed David and Evan coming to Brookshire Brothers at 4:34 p.m. and leaving at 4:38 p.m., where they bought a bag of cat food and a Coke. Next, David Temple said that they drove to the Home Depot, which is about a 10-minute drive from Brookshire Brothers. But he and Evan weren't captured on the Home Depot video until 36 minutes later, which makes no sense. Until Buck Bendeman comes forward, who says that he sees David Temple up in the area north of Home Depot and Brookshire Brothers, close to the house where he grew up, close to all the rice fields, at around 5 p.m. at the intersection of Morton Ranch Road and Katie Hockley Cutoff. Katie Hockley Cutoff, Morton Ranch Road intersection. Why didn't David Temple mention that? And what was he doing up there? Buck Bendeman is the key to this case. And then you throw in the staging of the burglary, the motive for the affair, and I got all finished with it. And I thought to myself, I would file this case right now. This case is like the pinnacle of circumstantial evidence cases, and a lot of prosecutors want more than that before they'll do their job. To me, circumstantial cases are beautiful. There might be more work required to tell the story as opposed to a DNA case or a confession case, but they're the best cases there are because the truth is in the details. Just after Thanksgiving 2004, 5 years after Belinda's murder, I said, all right, let's call the sheriff's department and let them know it's time to arrest David Temple.
That was a great day in all our lives.
Mr. Temple was pulled over on his way to work.
I would have loved to seen his reaction when they put him in that patrol car.
And as we're driving downtown, all I said was, you know what this is about, right? And he said, no, what? I said, Belinda. He's like, you got to be kidding me. This crap's been going on for almost 6 years now.
He was taken into custody and he quickly bonded out. Temple family, who's of means, realizes once Kelly Siegler gets involved, we got to make sure that we're going after the best defense, and that's Dick DeGuerin.
I'm an innocent man, and I have all the faith in the legal system.
Doesn't get any better than hiring one of the most famous attorneys, not just in Houston, not just in Texas, but nationally.
He's a fantastic attorney. He's one of the best. And him and Kelly going at it is a sight to see.
When I tried the Dror Goldberg case, gone up against Dick DeGuerin, the trial lasted 4 weeks and I lost 10 pounds, but I learned more in that trial watching him at work than I ever learned in my life. And the funny thing that nobody knows is right after the Dror Goldberg trial, he told me, you know, Kelly, you ought to run for DA. You did a good job. But by the time we went to trial on David Temple, I had tried and won a couple of other cases against Dick DeGuerin and his firm, so he didn't really like me as much anymore.
Because if anybody was going to put this puzzle together and then actually prove it to a jury, it was going to be Kelly Siegler. It was going to be the battle of the Titans. Going to the trial, you had a line to get in. It was like a standing room only crowd.
I think that the old adage is true that you have to open with a bang. Belinda Temple was discovered lying on the floor, on her tummy, with her face down, dead of a shotgun wound to the back of her head. And the other life that perished that day was a perfectly healthy 6-pound little baby girl with its heart beating inside her mommy's womb. Usually we go chronologically with life events. In this case, chronologically would be starting with when they got married and the downfall of their marriage and he meets Heather, and then the murder. But I didn't. I decided to start with the crime scene. The call goes out, law enforcement shows up, and what do they see? And start with that to explain what they saw, what they didn't see, what doesn't make sense, and then go back in time to build the rest of the story. The other thing that opening statements have to do, I believe, is address the weakness of your case. The truth is in the details.
She explains that she has no smoking gun. She has no forensic evidence, but she has a lot of little bits and pieces to the puzzle, and everything points at one person, David Temple.
5 months before Belinda was killed, well, David Temple met a new woman. On January the 8th of 1999, a Friday, the defendant says to Heather Scott, "You know I'm falling in love with you." 3 days later, Belinda Temple was executed in the back of the head in the home where she lived with this man. You never know when you give an opening statement if the defense is going to give one at all, but Dick gives an opening statement right behind me.
It's true that David had an affair, but David would never leave Belinda.
I'm going, what? Then he says that the glass in the back door broke because it slammed against this hutch that the Temples had behind the back door.
And as he goes into the house, he throws the door open.
So the defense tries to, I guess, give an explanation for why the glass wasn't where investigators thought it should be, with somebody punching in the glass.
After Dick tries to explain the glass from the back door being in the wrong place for a burglary, he then points his finger at the person that he believes is the one who broke into the house and killed Belinda.
The evidence will show that they ignored other leads.
And that suspect is Riley Joe Sanders.
Opening statements end, and the prosecutors start calling their witnesses.
I questioned Dean Holtke a lot about all the evidence at the scene, all the unusual things that he saw, but we spent an extra amount of time with him talking about the way the glass was spewed from the door once it was broken. The glass was all facing in an angle consistent with the door being open, because if the glass had been shot with the door shut, it would have gone straight ahead. On cross-examination, Dick tried really hard to pick apart Dean's theory of why that glass ended up where it did.
He was trying to say David came in like a linebacker and threw the door open. If the door slammed into the hutch, which there's no evidence that it did, because there was little figurines on this hutch that they weren't falling down, you would expect if the door hit there, you'd see a bunch of glass right there.
Besides the evidence having to do with the glass, another huge piece of the case had to do with the Temple's dog, Shaka. And there was a lot of testimony from a lot of witnesses about how vicious that dog was.
Dick DeGuerin was trying to tell us that David had the dog locked up in the garage while he was gone that day. But why would he do that with his wife in the house? I mean, that's her protection.
If Shaka had been in the backyard that day, there is no way any burglar would have gotten into that house to get to Belinda. Don't you think that if David Temple could have said back in 1999, well, the burglar got into my house because my dog was in the garage, he would have said it. The dog was in the backyard, and how in the world did a burglar ever get past that dog? Then we got into the interview that was done with David Temple the night of Belinda's murder. The beautiful thing about Chuck Leitner's interview of David Temple is that David Temple is locked into his story. The problem with his story is that even though he's on videotape and we know when he was at the Brookshire Brothers and at the Home Depot, there is an extraordinarily long period of time between those two places. That's when we call Buck Benjamin to the stand. I argued to the jury, the reason Buck Benjamin saw David Temple is because David Temple drove where the rice fields are to get rid of the shotgun, and as he's coming back to hurry up and alibi himself, that's when Buck Benjamin saw him.
When he leaves here at 4:38 and he gets to Home Depot at 5:14, that's 22 plus 14, that's 36 minutes unaccounted for. And it just so happens to coincide with the coincidence that Buck Benjamin sees him at that intersection in that time period.
After we got all through presenting the evidence having to do with the timeline of that day when Belinda was murdered, then we moved on to the part talking about motive. We tried to make the jury understand the relationship between Belinda and David Temple, who they are, what their marriage is all about, and we did that through bringing in Temple's, at the time, very best friends, Quentin and Tammy Harlan. They were the ones who best could talk about the way David treated Belinda behind closed doors, about the way David Temple called her fat, the way David Temple told her that she was white trash from Nacogdoches. And then Quentin talks about, at school, the happy hours where they were flirting with the other teachers, specifically Heather, and how that relationship between David Temple and Heather evolved.
When we first learned about Heather Scott, the hot young teacher that David Temple was showing interest in, she kind of blows it off like it was just a casual relationship. But by the time David Temple's trial comes around, she's married to him and is now Heather Scott Temple.
Heather and David Temple had been married for 6 years. She was not cooperative. She did not want to come. She was subpoenaed to come to court, and she did. But she was not my friend in this case.
Everybody's wondering, what is she going to say when she takes the stand?
You have a marital privilege if conversations you have are said while you're married. David Temple was not married to Heather at the time the murder happened. She takes the stand, and I have to pull the words out of her to get her to answer the question. The answers came eventually. I think the significance of her is the motive. She admits that they were flirting heavy. She admits that he tells her he loves her on Friday, 3 days before the murder. She talks about Valentine's Day after the murder. They're doing the roses and chocolates thing. They get caught being seen out at dinner with each other. She even acknowledged that he wasn't crying and sad. And then I called a witness that I never knew I was going to have. An opening statement. Dick brought up that David Temple only ever owned a 20-gauge shotgun, and that made the news. A man named Clinton Stockdick, who grew up with David Temple's younger brother, called in. And he told me about how he hunted with the Temples his whole childhood, and he was mad that David Temple would try to say that he only ever owned a 20-gauge shotgun when Clinton Stockdick knew better. But I had a new witness, and I remember all the Temple's family's faces. They were mad. I rested my case, and then Dick began presenting his case.
Dick DeGuerin tries to refocus the jury. And so he talked about the hutch.
Well, what he didn't know is that Tom Lucas had the hutch at his house. So we let Dick do his thing, and then Dean drove up to Nacogdoches and got the hutch and brought it back. And then we put it in the courtroom to blow up their theory.
You can imagine the surprise in the courtroom, particularly from the defense. I'm sure they never expected to see the hutch again.
And Dean's able to show how the dings on the door don't match the dings on the hutch, and the hutch has nothing to do with why that glass is broken.
Then Dick DeGuerin makes a bold move. He puts David Temple on the stand.
You don't normally see defendants charged with murder taking the stand, especially someone who's charged with murdering his pregnant wife.
Maybe the thought was David Temple's Mr. Clean Cut, And if he does a really good job testifying for himself, it might cause jurors to have doubt. David Temple does a really good job on direct, maintaining his composure. You don't see any flashes of temper. He speaks wonderfully of Belinda and of Evan and of Heather.
Then Kelly stepped up to cross-examine David.
I was just hoping to poke a few holes in that veneer.
Watching Kelly was like watching a shark seizing onto a prey.
Kelly laid out the timeline and really grilled David on where he was and what he had done on the day that Belinda was murdered.
I asked him all the questions everybody wanted to know. Why'd you take your son to the park if he was sick? Why did you go to that store that was 6 miles away? Why did you feel the urgent need to buy cat food and a Coke? Why'd you go to Home Depot because you didn't buy anything or even look at anything in the store that day? He didn't have answers. I asked David Temple about Buck Benjamin, but David Temple kept insisting that he went straight to Home Depot when he and Evan left Brookshire Brothers.
An interesting moment in the trial was when Kelly Siegler asked David, "You were trying to save the life of your wife and your baby. Why didn't you have any blood on you?"
Don't you think if David Temple really happened upon the closet and found Belinda on the floor in her own pool of blood, and there would have been a speck of blood on his whole body? He says he checked her pulse, her carotid artery.
You know how to do CPR?
Yes.
Okay, I want you to do CPR for that baby.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
But there's no blood on him.
How is there not a speck of blood on you? How does that happen? And the best answer he could come up with was, I don't know. I don't know. Really, there should have been blood on him somewhere.
Did he really try to save her?
Objection beyond the record.
I never got so much exercise in my life, standing up and down for all the objections that were made by Dick DeGuerin.
That's when we objected and asked that she stay in the record.
Then Kelly asks David Temple about his relationship with Heather Scott.
I asked if he had sex with Heather during his marriage to Belinda, and he said he had. That New Year's Eve weekend, telling Heather that he loved her on Friday, and golly, our burglars burglarizing his house 3 days later, and his wife ends up dead.
The questions Kelly's asking, he's setting the scene. She's showing what was going on in the Temple household between David and Belinda in the weeks leading up to her murder.
It was quite a sight to see. David Temple doesn't like being challenged by anybody. David Temple thinks the world revolves around him, and to have little Kelly Siegler, this pit bull, just firing off.
I think that the points that I needed to make were made. You just can't ignore the coincidences. When David Temple got off the stand, I'm pretty sure he was glad that was over. Throughout his whole case, Dick DeGuerin kept coming back to the idea that Riley Joe Sanders, the kid living next door, was the person who killed Belinda Temple.
So then Kelly calls a surprise witness.
We called Riley Joe Sanders as a rebuttal witness. We knew Dick DeGuerin was going to blame it on Riley Joe Sanders. He always blamed it on Riley Joe Sanders. So when Dick presented his case and his defense was that Riley Joe Sanders was the murderer, at that point, because he's put on evidence, we have the right to call rebuttal witnesses. That is when we called Riley Joe Sanders to the stand. I asked Riley Joe, what did you think of Miss Temple? And it was clear to everyone in that courtroom how much he liked Belinda as a neighbor, as a lady, as a friend, and as his teacher. He understood why she told his parents he was skipping so much school. It was clear to everybody in that courtroom that this 16-year-old kid had cooperated completely and had no motive in the entire universe to want to kill Belinda Temple. Riley Joe Sanders talks about how it felt when he heard Miss Temple was killed, how it felt to be blamed for it, what he went through. It was wonderful. The 16-year-old neighbor kid they want to blame it on obviously didn't do this, blew up in Dick DeGuerin's face, and it was a beautiful thing to watch. After Riley Joe Sanders testified on rebuttal, of course, Dick was able to cross-examine him. But yet he never asked him the million-dollar question, did you kill Belinda Temple? Are you the one who fired that shotgun into the brain of Belinda Temple and her unborn baby? He never asked anything close to that. Why didn't he? I think we all know the answer to that. The first thing that I told y'all a month ago was the truth is in the details. The truth is in the details. And what that means is the lies that this man told and the things that he chose not to say, the actions that this man took and the actions that he chose not to take are the little pieces that are the truth. That family has decided they have the right to grant absolution to this defendant. And they want you to do the same thing. The problem with that is it overlooks the truth and it denies justice to Belinda and Aaron. That was the longest final argument I ever gave. It was over an hour long, but this case, to me, had so much detailed circumstantial evidence, and I needed to remind the jury of all those details one more time so that they could try to remember all of them when they went back to deliberate. Buck Bendeman is circumstantial evidence because he's got no reason to lie. And the circumstance just happens to fit during the time period that David Temple forgot to tell the police about in between Alibi 1 and Alibi 2. And what Buck Bendeman said 9 years ago, remember, was he didn't know David Temple or what he drove after high school. Medium blue, short wheelbase, single cab, Chevrolet, 91 or 92 truck. Got it exactly right. There was nothing Dick DeGuerin could do about it because that is a circumstance that's unchangeable because it's the truth. And Mr. DeGuerin tells you that the explanation for all this circumstantial evidence is that Riley Joe Sanders is the killer. Riley Joe Sanders wants to kill Belinda Temple because she told his parents he was missing a lot of school for his own good, or because there were some broken beer bottles out on the street one day. Mr. DeGuerin wants that to be a reasonable doubt. Please, you know with all your heart David Temple is guilty of murder. And today, almost 9 years later, it's time to let the souls of Belinda and Aaron in heaven rest in peace.
It was a very scary situation. I had no idea what to expect.
It's hard to predict. You've got 12 people trying to decipher a very difficult case without a I got you moment. I'm hoping that they see what we see, that David Temple was the only one who had the motive and had the means and wanted to kill Belinda.
The trial lasted for about a month. The jury came back in just a few hours.
Mr. Foreman, I understand you have a verdict. If you'll pass it to the bailiff, please. We, the jury, find the defendant, David Mark Temple, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment.
When they came back and said David Temple is guilty, you could watch the relief on Belinda's family, and you could see it visibly. Temple family was just dumbfounded. They were floored. I mean, they stormed out.
The jury went back to deliberate on punishment, and they came back and gave him a life sentence and a $10,000 fine, which is the very most he could get. And the jury told me afterwards they wanted to stand up and clap at the job Riley Joe Sanders did defending himself and his innocence.
We got the guilty verdict. I mean, it was such relief. I don't know if there's any words to describe how happy we were to finally get justice for Belinda and our niece, Aaron.
When the David Temple trial ended, I went back to doing my job in special crimes. And it was in January 2008 that I filed to run for DA. Getting justice means working with law enforcement and knowing how to be a prosecutor. It's what I've always done. Dick kept saying to the media, Kelly Siegler has finally convicted an innocent man. She'll do anything to win. But before that, the media loved me. And I saw how they turned and what they would write. I thought, what's happening? David Temple's guilty as hell. And now all of a sudden I'm a monster and I did something wrong? What? Dick DeGuerin was trying to make sure I didn't become the DA. And I didn't. I lost. After I lost the race for DA, I didn't know what I was going to do next. Eventually, I took a job as the special prosecutor working with the Wharton County DA's office. But I knew that I knew how to work on cold cases. So around 2012, I worked on the episode that would become the pilot for Cold Justice. It felt good. That was what I knew how to do. That was what I was good at. And then the Temple case started up all over again.
8 years after David was convicted, the defense announces that they have a new witness come forward. And that witness can prove that David Temple is innocent of Belinda's murder.
After a case goes through the normal process of appeals, it should be over. The only way to keep it from being over is to claim that you have newly discovered evidence or that something happened with your prosecutor during the trial that rose to the level of prosecutorial misconduct that necessitates a new trial. Now David Temple's defense team is claiming they have new evidence. A brand new witness named Daniel Glasscock, who supposedly heard Riley Joe Sanders say that he killed Belinda Temple.
All of a sudden, the case is in the news all over again.
They eventually get Daniel Glasscock in to testify about what he says Riley Joe Sanders told him about the day Belinda Temple was murdered.
When he went to the house, as he went upstairs, the dog attacked him. He shot the dog, heard Belinda, put the dog in the closet, panicked, and ran.
But we all know the Temple's dog was never shot. So that all blows up. So then the defense's only avenue left to get a new trial is to say prosecutorial misconduct because I withheld evidence. Because when you can't prove your client is innocent because they're not, that's the throwdown answer for a defense lawyer, was to claim the prosecutor forgot to give you this, or hid something, or cheated or lied, or did something improper. At this point, Dick DeGuerin no longer represented David Temple. These new claims were being brought by Stanley Schneider and Casey Gautreaux.
Prosecutorial misconduct in the way it played in this case was the defense claimed Kelly Siegler did not turn over all the evidence about a potential alternative suspect, Riley Joe Sanders. It's called a Brady violation.
Brady evidence is any evidence that is exculpatory or mitigates punishment or affects the credibility of a witness. All of those things are things that have to be turned over by the prosecution to the defense. In my opinion, I turned over every single thing that anyone could define as exculpatory or Brady in this case. And the defense says, well, she had 38 instances of doing something wrong. No, I didn't. Look at them one by one by one. Not one of those is truly exculpatory evidence. I mean, here's one that I didn't turn over the FBI profiler's report, where they say usually a white male did it, he doesn't like his mom and he's unemployed. Not kidding. That I didn't turn that over. And it goes just like that through all 38 of them. We didn't hide anything from Dick DeGuerin, but the entire case file was not turned over because back in 2005, Dick DeGuerin asked for an examining trial to see if a judge finds probable cause to indict. But if you ask for an examining trial, the office policy at that time dictated that the file would then become closed to you. That was the policy. Dick DeGuerin used to be a Harris County prosecutor. He grew up in the courthouse world just like I did. He knows office policy. I remember saying to him, "Why do you want to do that, Dick? You know that the file's going to become closed to you if you do that." And he said to me, "Don't you tell me how to do my job." Like, copy that.
On my left is the complete investigative report. This was never seen.
You know, what can you do? You just have to kind of suck it up and take it. And I was also trying to be strong for Belinda's family, because they would call me going, "Kelly, what are we going to do?"
And now there's another hearing called about whether or not David Temple should get another trial.
I was called to testify to explain all of my actions while I handled this case and to answer all the accusations that I hadn't given them certain pieces of evidence. Many people told me, "You need to have a lawyer." And I thought, why? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to walk in that courtroom like a defendant with a lawyer. But you know what? I was treated like a defendant, exactly like a defendant. I testified for 5 full days.
And on December 2016, the Texas Court of Appeals grants David Temple a new trial.
The ruling came down that there was going to be another trial based on prosecutorial misconduct. I just couldn't believe it. I was mad. On the Court of Criminal Appeals, 4 judges voted that David Temple gets a new trial. 1 judge concurred with that. 3 judges said no, and 1 abstained because he used to be a prosecutor in our office. So that's how close that ruling was to make the proclamation and the finding he gets a new trial.
It's kind of a gut punch to get word that that's going to happen.
Back in 2007, when we got the guilty verdict, I thought it was over. He was going to prison for life, and I could go on with my life. I never thought that the ruling would ever be overturned. Never would have dreamed that could have happened.
I remember all the accusations about all that evidence that I supposedly didn't disclose and hid. And you would call me, and we did tell him. It came out in the trial.
Yes.
It was all a bunch of smoke and mirrors.
I wanted justice for Belinda and Aaron. Belinda was everything to me. She was my protector when she was here, and I'm going to try to do everything to continue to get justice for Belinda. I feel that's my job.
The frustrating thing is all that you've been through and what all you had to go through with the criminal justice system and how it let you down and how we let you down.
You did not let me down, Kelly.
David Temple is now released on bond. He's out of prison. He's a free man again and awaiting a new trial.
I was scared for my life. I was the only one in the Lucas family that testified. I feel like I had a huge role in getting him convicted. My brothers had me go out and buy 2 guns. I mean, he killed Belinda and his daughter. Why wouldn't he do it to somebody else?
The defense is saying that they had all this new evidence, and everybody's wondering, what is it?
If there was new evidence in the file on the case that proved that David Temple was innocent, I wanted to know what it was. Maybe I had judged this case wrong.
We're waiting for justice to be served once and for all, and for the people that put me there and lied and cheated to be held accountable.
David.
Yeah.
When we were waiting to hear who was going to be the prosecutor for the new trial, I was very worried that somebody wouldn't appreciate all the details to the case. And David Temple may be walking free and have gotten away with 2 murders. So when I heard that the case had been assigned to Lisa Tanner and Bill Turner, I started crying because I was so relieved. Bill Turner's a guy that a lot of us have learned from. Lisa Tanner was more of my companion. We grew up together as prosecutors. She is phenomenal in the courtroom. By this point, 15 years had passed since Belinda Temple's murder, but for Lisa and Bill, all the documents, all the exhibits, everything was still perfectly preserved.
When we got the case, the defense attorney, Stanley Schneider, had a huge advantage. He knew the case backwards and forwards, and he started filing motions for speedy trials and motions to have Mr. Temple deposed as quickly as possible. And we kept telling him, we got to have time to learn this thing. Give us a break here. So we did what we would always do in a case like this, start from the beginning. When Bill and I got the case, David Temple was innocent as far as we were concerned.
We walked through all of the evidence.
Lisa and Bill saw all of the evidence the same way that the rest of us did and that I presented at the first trial.
And came to the conclusion, look, if you want to follow the presumption that David Temple is innocent, the door is just closed no matter which way you move.
David Temple's timeline made no sense. His affair with Heather, the dog, that he never had a 12-gauge shotgun, all of it. We all saw it the same way.
In the end, we were convinced David Temple was guilty.
Lisa and Bill planned to present the same evidence that I presented at the first trial, but they wanted to present a couple of things a little differently. And they're bringing in a glass expert to make sure that that too is presented even clearer in the minds of the jurors.
In the new trial, the first thing we did was looked at the home invasion part of it. It just didn't make sense. I think there's all kinds of reasons to show that David Temple killed Belinda Temple as soon as she got home. On the night of the killing, David Temple said he drove into the garage, shut the door, got his son out, put him on a bicycle because he was just going to go tell Belinda they were home. Same as in the first trial. We were able to show that there was no room to ride a bicycle with two cars in a two-car garage and the door down. So that didn't make any sense. And then we called Angela Vielma. She testified in the first trial. What was significant about Angie was the timing.
Angie was a girl that lived in the neighborhood several blocks away. The day the murder was committed, Angie had a fight with her boyfriend, and she decided that she was going to leave and go to her friend Roseanne's house. And Roseanne lived across the street from the Temples. Angie started walking, but she had to stop before she could pass the Temple driveway because David Temple was pulling into his garage.
And she had the time pegged almost exactly at 5:25. That ends up being important because David Temple's statement was that at 5:25, he got out of his car, put Evan on a bicycle, took a few steps into the backyard, saw that the door was broken open, grabbed his son, and ran across to the Ruggerios. All of those things would have drawn the attention to anybody. But Angela walked by their house at 5:25, just walked across the street just a few hundred feet, and then sat on the porch for 10 minutes, and none of that happened.
The next time David Temple is seen is around 5:35 p.m. when he takes his son over to his neighbors, the Ruggerios, prior to calling 911.
Somebody's broken into my house and my wife has been shot.
So that put David Temple in the house for approximately 10 or 11 minutes. It is our position that for 10 minutes, David Temple was staging the house. He made sure things were just right before he let third parties know that this had happened.
And then we felt like the jury had to hear the situation with the dog. There's three places Shaka could have been. Shaka could have been in the garage, Shaka could have been in the backyard, or Shaka could have been in the house. As the garage door was going down, Angie told us she saw David Temple's legs walking beside the truck. One thing that was significant to me was she saw his legs, but she didn't see a dog. So Shaka was not in the garage because he would have been right there with David Temple if he had been in the garage. Also, in the crime scene pictures, you see a bowl full of wet dog food. And I have big dogs. I know how big dogs are. We told the jury, There's no big dog that's going to leave wet food in his bowl. That doesn't make sense.
So, same as in the first trial. And if the dog was in the backyard, no stranger's going to get by that dog to get to Belinda.
Another huge crossroads was when we enlisted the help of Dr. Ravi, the glass expert.
Ravi Shandar's amazing. I mean, he's the guy that does stress of all objects. So he's the guy that keeps our airplanes in the air. But one of his specialties was measuring what happens to glass when it breaks. One of the defensive theories was that when David Temple ran back to the house and discovered Belinda's body, he went through the house with such force that it bounced against the hutch, and that caused the glass to discharge into the living room.
Dr. Ravi came back and said that couldn't be.
The glass break expert agreed with the testimony that was brought up in the first trial.
It became obvious that it was staged. And the next question then is, does Belinda Temple have anybody with a motive to kill her? She had no enemies. There was only one person with a motive to kill Belinda Temple, and that was David Temple.
Just like in the first trial, Lisa and Bill knew that they were going to have to call Heather Scott Temple to the stand.
During the first few days of the trial, we find out that Heather filed for divorce from David. Wow. What timing.
I was in Florida working on a case on Cold Justice, and I got my text messages, breaking news that Heather Scott Temple filed for a divorce. And I was like, oh my God, good for you. Good for you.
The issue is, okay, how does this influence her testimony? Is she going to stick with her original testimony? Is she taking an opposite position? Is her motive now to try to hurt David Temple? Did she hold something back in the first trial? Is she going to tell us now?
No one had any idea what she was going to say this time. The hope was maybe there was some other little piece that she had always known but didn't come forward with that might come up in the second trial. But she was consistent. She told what she knew, and she did what she needed to.
I think all in all, the way she testified at the first trial was accurate as to what the testimony was at the second trial, so we had no indication that her divorce influenced her testimony.
In my opinion, she didn't know that fool was going to go execute his wife and child, and then she's stuck with the rest of her life ruined because he's that selfish.
And then, just like in the first trial, the defense pointed at Riley Joe Sanders as an alternate suspect.
It certainly appears from all of the records that in the first trial, the defense did receive at least some information about the investigation into Riley Joe Sanders. And by the time we got the case, the defense attorney, he had the whole file. I mean, he even had Kelly's notes. But in an abundance of caution, we copied it again and gave it all to him a second time.
Riley Joe Sanders is now 36 years old when he's called to testify again in this case.
We've got nothing to fear about Riley Joe Sanders on the stand.
When you met him, you realized a couple of things. Number one, that at the time Belinda was murdered, Riley Joe Sanders had just been a really dumb kid. And then secondly, you realized, this many years later, he was a really nice guy.
He has no motive to kill an 8.5-month pregnant woman.
I understand why the defense made him a scapegoat, but more just from the human level, I just felt so sorry for the guy. His family lost their home. They had to hire a lawyer, and they used all their savings over this case.
And then Stanley Schneider said the defense rests. Think about that. The defense had everything, the entire file, including my work notes. And with all that, everything, there was not one scrap of new evidence they presented in their big new trial that they'd been squawking for all these years. No new evidence.
There wasn't anything that the defense did we weren't expecting.
So to all those people out there that say I hid something, where in the hell is it?
It is our position that Belinda Temple was killed almost immediately when she entered her home. The testimony from David Temple was that when Belinda got home, she was tired and went up to sleep. When her body was found, her shoes were still on her feet. Her glasses, which were driving glasses, were still on her head. So she did not kick off her shoes. She didn't go up to bed and take off her glasses. She was killed before either of those two things happened. And David Temple did it.
When the second jury went out to deliberate, a lot of people were pretty nervous. Nobody knew if they were going to come to a different conclusion than the first.
I was working a case in Fort Myers, Florida, and I got a text message. He's guilty again. And I went to my room at the hotel and started crying. It was the exact same case and trial and evidence, and he was just as guilty as he was in 2007. I wanted to scream, I told you. It was relief, and it was anger.
The immediate things that came to my mind are justice for Belinda Temple, justice for the Lucas family, justice for Riley Joe Sanders, justice for Kelly Sigler.
We went to the punishment phase, and the punishment range was 5 years to 99 years or life.
Well, Evan Temple took the stand. Here's somebody that's lost their mother, and their dad's going to be in the penitentiary forever. And so for him pleading for his father's life, I think it's a significant thing.
We were very careful and treated him with kid gloves.
What a horrible situation to be in, to lose your mom and then to have your dad charged with that.
Finally, the jury sends a note that they're deadlocked. In the punishment phase, the judge has to declare a mistrial. So now we're waiting for a retrial on the punishment phase of someone who's been convicted twice of murder.
It broke me. It broke me. I will try my best to keep David in prison.
What happens in March of 2020? COVID. Everything's shut down. And we wait. And we wait. And finally, in April of 2023, the punishment phase resumes.
I went down to the courthouse, and it brought back a lot of emotions, mostly feeling bad that they were all having to do it again. And I was very hopeful that it was finally going to be over with. The jury came back with a verdict in 2 hours.
We, the jury, assess his punishment at confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life.
The jury came back with the punishment of life in the penitentiary as well as the maximum fine of $10,000, which meant that the jury was outraged. I mean, there's no reason to fine somebody if they get a life sentence, right?
You made a decision to kill Belinda. And that was all your decision. I want you to think about that the rest of your life when you sit in prison or rot in hell.
3 trials, 3 juries, and finally, David Temple is back where he belongs.
So much relief, so much being able to just say, thank God, finally, it's over.
You want to see all your cases cleared, but some of them are going to touch you in a different way.
I have never in my career ever seen a case like this. I hope to hell I never see a case like this again.
Disappointed by David Temple's sentence, the defense team plans to appeal on several grounds.
It's not over till it's over.
I already booked my appointment with the parole board, dude, and we're all going to be there, and you ain't getting out.
We got him. He's where he needs to be.
If you could say whatever you wanted to say to David Temple today, what would you say?
You didn't have to do this. Could have gotten a divorce. David, you robbed Evan and Aaron of a wonderful mother.
What would you say to other family members out there?
Just never give up. I mean, it took us over 24 years, but we did get justice for Belinda. Just don't give up. I feel like this case would still be cold if he wouldn't have went forward with this case. I truly believe that, and I love you for that. I've told you before, you remind me of Belinda a lot. With your determination, your heart of gold, I love you, Kelly.
For you to tell me that, there couldn't be a better compliment. All right, baby. Bye.
I give Belinda's family an awful lot of credit. They never backed down. They sought justice, and they were there every single day for 3 trials, 24 years.
36 jurors have found him guilty. Think about that. David Temple committed this murder because he's that selfish. He thought he could commit a murder rather than get a divorce and have to split up custody and child support payments. And his family accepted it and moved on and forgave him. With this case, I learned a lot about how it feels when things go wrong with the criminal justice system. Sometimes it is unfair. I saw what it did to the sheriff's department, to Belinda's family, to me. We all got a whole lot more cynical and upset with the system as a result of this case, I think. But you know what? There were people out there who wanted to make sure that Belinda Temple got justice along with her baby, and there were a lot of them.